Okay, it is 6:15. We will call the meeting to order at this time. Dr. Thomas, if you would conduct roll call for us.
Yes, ma'am. Mr. Davis, Miss Gallagher,
Here.
Mrs. Davis,
Here.
Dr. Yeager, Dr. Gant,
Here.
Dr. Maddox, Dr. Dykeman,
Here.
Dr. Anderson,
Here.
and Attorney Holt.
Here.
Okay, thank you. So we have a quorum. We'll move forward with item 2. This is to amend and or adopt the agenda. The floor is open. Okay. All right. I have a motion by Dr. Anderson, a second by Dr. Maddox. Any questions or discussion? All in favor, if you would say aye and raise your hand.
Hi.
Aye. Any opposed, the same sign. And any abstaining? Okay. We're going to start with our informational items. This is number 3. 3.1 is our early Head Start and Head Start Policy Council meeting minutes and reports. Any follow-up questions or further discussion?
I have just a quick question. I noticed that the minutes are from June. Is that the last time that the group is able to meet as a whole? Who's our representative on Head Start?
No, the minutes are always a few months behind.
Okay. I didn't
So
notice
yeah,
that.
they've been meeting every month since June, but the minutes don't get finalized, approved
Until
for a couple of months.
okay. It just jumped out at me today. Thank you.
Mhm.
All right, thank you. Okay, we'll move forward with the Athens Community Career Academy report.
Okay. Do
All
we
right.
have somebody that goes to that meeting? We don't have anybody on that board, do we?
I don't know.
Well, I
But we
just
have
enjoyed the meeting that we just
Yeah.
had. I'll say that. But yeah, that was great. I don't think we had anybody on that.
Yeah, I don't think we do based on at least based on what was shared with us, but
Right.
I haven't looked
Yeah,
at, the historical ones for the members present.
So I thoroughly enjoyed the joint meeting today, and I'll say that. And I think, again, there was so much good information passed, and it really shows how closely the Career Academy is aligned to the needs of our community. So if we've been paying attention to what the Mayor and Commission have been paying attention to, and they're trying to address, it seems like we are filling a big gap there with the Career Academy. I got a better level of understanding, Mr. Harris is here, in terms of the structure for the Career Academy. So that was very important to get some clarity on it being a program. And I didn't realize that was a statewide initiative where they went from being full schools to programs, which gives them a lot more flexibility. So I got a lot of questions answered from today's presentation. So thank you. And to Chef Manny, hats off. That is the most extraordinary vegetable lasagna I have ever had in my life. So I'm hoping that we will have that for sale in the Buzz Cafe soon.
And I was just going to add that Mr. Harris does usually attend just from cabinet, but he's out of town today, but he does attend and can usually answer any questions as well from that meeting.
Thank you.
I have seen in some previous notes from their meetings that I think that a little bit more board presence would be appreciated by that group. So perhaps we could maybe rotate attending some of their meetings. If not every meeting has a board member participate, at least, a few per semester.
And over the years, I have attended a lot of their training, which is really helpful too as they've evolved. And that's excellent training that they bring down to prepare the academies and keep abreast of what's happening around us. So that map really does tell a story of how there's collaboration across the state to support industry in our area. So great, strong economic force.
Okay. Yeah. So if the board is in agreement with that, I think that would be fine. To have a rotating person that attends. Dr. Thomas, if that works. Dr. Anderson, can you be responsible for giving us a schedule for that, or at least sharing a document with us so we can sign up for those? months. All right. Oh, okay. Okay. Wonderful. Thank you. Okay. What about the SPLOST monthly report?
I voted yesterday or Tuesday. Tuesday. I voted yesterday too, but I voted for real Tuesday. That was great. Actually, I voted last week, but anyway, I'm glad it passed. It really was.
All right. And I guess in relation to that, the only question that I had was when we did the meeting, I think it was earlier in the spring, was it? Ms. Hall, Dr. Thomas, and Ms. Davis.
The
Remember
East
we were
Blocks
we were at
out at the Annex, Whitehead Annex.
yes.
Uh-huh.
And just got to get an idea, of what was needed and things like that. Now that it has passed, do you all think that would be helpful again, or like how do we? I know the East Block Committee, they sort of monitor what's going to be happening, but I'm just wondering. I don't think all of us were able to come, so I'm just wondering if that would be something that you feel would be helpful or not really. I think it was a lot of work from what I could tell. Dr. Thomas and Mr. Gilbert, at least it was a lot of information.
But I think maybe he could do just a repeat of that with a summary of where our priorities are now that it has passed, at least giving like a timeline. Like we all know that Clarke Middle is there, but he can really
Yeah.
begin just a timeline update on like what that starting will look like and what our next steps are. If that's something, Mr. Gilbert, when would you all like that? Would it?
I mean, I don't know that it's urgent, but just so we, as we're talking to like the community and constituents and things like that, just so we have an idea. But
So
I
maybe
do
we can put it
know
on
I
the
think it's on our
January
website.
meeting, and I only say January because we only have
okay.
one in December. Oh, I'm sorry, Ms. Davis.
Isn't that plan on our website already? So do you guys like update that periodically? I thought the East Blocks presentation was out there, or did it is on the
The
website, right?
presentation is there.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
And so, how often does that get updated? Just annually or something? Okay, that would be good.
We can do that.
And another step in the process is we have to do get some additional paperwork validating the bond issue as part of that spot. So probably have that ready for you in December.
Okay.
Form resolutions to approve that process.
Okay.
And that does fall under that description of responsibilities in the policy, as well as what used to be the property committee. And so again, until we resolve that, I guess we can just play it by ear here.
Yeah. Okay. Any other opinions or strong thoughts either way? Okay. Yeah, so I think just a very brief. Okay. All right, we will move forward to number 4. These are our board committee reports. We're going to start with policy committee. Ms. Hull, I think are you giving our overview? No? No, you're not. Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I think that may be another area of misinformation on my part tonight. I know we got an email from Dr. Yeager, and for some reason I thought I heard her say that you would be, but maybe I'm thinking about like that first of the year. Okay.
It was somebody on staff. I thought she identified. I don't know. Either way.
Well, I get, and if I don't want to put you on the spot, Ms. Hull, so I guess if there are any questions about what is uploaded here, you can reach out to Dr. Yeager. Or is there any further discussion just from?
Well, we're going to talk about the policies
Mhm.
themselves, right?
Right,
So I
right.
think we're good.
Okay. All right. Okay, we'll move forward to government and community relations. I did not have a document, but I do remember being on. I think there are some updates from Dr. Anderson. Am I making this up too? There's some updates coming from you.
No, you are not making
Okay.
it up.
Okay. I'm like,
Mr. Davis did tap me to give the report for the committee. He did not submit a formal report, however, so I'm just going to kind of go off of several different
Sure.
levels of communication I've received from him. So we did have our GCRC meeting where we individually synthesized information from the survey that was done to the community to gauge the performance of the board. There were 28 questions and about 791 responses that we had to synthesize. So it was a pretty extensive task for us at the individual level. And so what we did at our last meeting was got together and discussed our individual findings. And then our next steps are going to be to take all of our individual findings and put them together in a formal report to present to the board so that it's more cohesive and organized, and the thoughts just kind of make a little bit more sense. The takeaway from that meeting and the discussions that we had about the results of that survey, a lot of the responses were very much geared towards operations and how the school district operates. And so we had to really filter through a lot of the qualitative responses to get at the real sort of what are the issues that the board needs to address with regards to our own performance. But once we did filter down to that information, it was very consistent with what was found with our panel discussions that we had a couple of months ago. I mean, it was very much repetition of those same findings. So we're not really getting a lot of different information. But I will present, or our committee will get together in our next meeting and vote on that report. And then once we vote on that report, we'll bring it up to the full board so that there's a consensus from the committee that that's the information that we want to bring to you all to decide what next steps we need to make as a board to address some of the issues that were identified. And then Mr. Davis also sent the 2021 legislative agenda to the full board and asks that we all take a look at it. And if we have any comments, suggestions, or recommended changes, that we take those to the chair, and then the committee can reconvene and discuss that legislative agenda more in detail before bringing it back to the full board, because there has not been any feedback from individuals in the current structure of the board on that legislative agenda. It's my understanding that that legislative agenda was put together by various board members over the last couple of years, some of whom are no longer on this board. So to sort of build a legislative agenda that cohesively meets the voice of this composition of the board, we really should review it, give feedback, and then let the committee take a look at it again before bringing it back to the full board. So hopefully we can do that by December. So if you do have any opinions about the legislative agenda, please present them to Mr. Davis so that we can discuss them at our next committee meeting and bring this back to a vote for December's work session and regular board meeting.
Do you know when that was sent out?
Well, he said, let's see. I have it in my Google Drive, so if he did not send it, just let me know and I can resend it. But he did say in this email that he said he will ask Lawrence to post the legislative agenda. So
I didn't think
so,
okay. I have
so
not seen it.
Mr. Harris will post the legislative agenda rather than me sending a copy that may not be the correct version. So we'll ask him to do that for you all. And then the last thing is the joint Ccsd board and ACC commission meeting that's not yet scheduled, but the proposed date should be somewhere around January. Mr. Davis recommended January the 31st in person, with dinner, and then the event itself going from about 6 to 8. He suggested a structure of doing 3 breakout sessions with board members and commissioners, breaking out into East Side, West Side, and Central/North Athens, and then sort of doing an inventory or audit of the recreational activities for young kids that whether there's a desert essentially in these three regions, according to the board and commissioners that represent those areas, that we can discuss as a larger group and how we can meet those recreational deserts that we may identify in our various regions. That was his recommendation of how to structure that committee meeting. But, you know, that's one person's recommendation. So if you all have any other thoughts as to how this meeting can be structured, that would be wonderful. One of our major issues that I've identified as a member of this committee, but that several commissioners as well as I would say committee members, is that these joint meetings, while there's a lot of robust discussion that takes place, there's not much action that goes beyond the discussion of those meetings. So perhaps there can be a more robust discussion about how we can structure these meetings to have action items that are then initiated post-meeting. So if you all have any thoughts, definitely let us know, but the committee will definitely get together and talk about this a little bit more. But the proposed date for that for now is January 31st. And then the last item is Mr. Harris has put together, he and his team have organized a community event to take place on November 13th that we're all super duper excited about. He did send out the flyer to board members, and it's also on the website and in various other outlets. So hopefully the community is getting aware of that event that's scheduled to take place. And as board members, I hope that we all participate and encourage others to attend as well. So, and that's all I have. Any thoughts, questions, concerns?
Dr. Anderson, Mr. Harris is out of town at a training, but he's listening
Mhm.
and said that the legislative agenda is on the website under BOE.
Okay, it's on our page.
Yes, so it's there. We can pull that up on the page. And he told me earlier today when we spoke, I think 40 community youth serving agencies have signed up to participate for information sharing at the event next week.
Oh, awesome!
So we're excited.
Very exciting.
I think it's also worth mentioning that some arm of the unified government was going to have a similar kind of
Yes,
event,
I saw that.
and having someone brought it to their attention that the school district was having one, and they have deferred, and now they're partnering with us, which is an ideal thing to happen,
Mhm.
so
Yes.
that we're not at odds. And so again, it's one of those things where it makes more sense. They're asking the same questions of the same people, so let's do some things together, which I
Mhm.
think would be a great part of our discussion at our next meeting with them. Thank you.
And so if we have any feedback or thoughts regarding that agenda for the joint meeting or the legislative, we just get that to you all, the committee.
Yes, I would.
Okay.
I would send it to Mr. Davis, and then he can add it to the agenda for discussion for our next meeting.
Wonderful. All right. Any other questions for Dr. Anderson? Okay. Let's move forward to fiscal responsibility. Are there any?
So I did actually see the email that said send a written report. I did not. So fiscal responsibility did meet last for the month of October, and because of our shortened time frame, our biggest agenda item we deferred until our next meeting, and that was to talk more about the West Broad or hear more about West Broad. Unless the district wants to bring something to us about that today, we may answer some of those questions that we may have had. But again, for us, the challenge is looking at our policies to make sure that we understand clearly what the fiscal responsibility committee should be paying attention to. Actually, that should be in concert with the district in terms of how they want to get that information to us. So that's where we are still in trying to combine these two very large pieces of our work into something that we can achieve in an hour. That's challenging. So that's where we are.
Thank you. Yes.
I would just like to ask if for the discussion on West Broad, if that could be part of the full board meeting.
Yes, ma'am. And actually in my superintendent's report today, I'm just going to go back over the information that I shared with the entire board the end of last week. My days run together, or the beginning of this week. But I did share the chart with you all and what my recommendation in terms of early learning is going to be. So I will share that with everyone today. And then we'll talk briefly, well, like a sentence about West Broad, but we aren't there yet, but I'll talk about that a little more in my report. Yes, ma'am.
All right, any additional questions, thoughts, or comments? Okay. We will move forward to accountability.
The only thing I have is that we will meet next Thursday after the meeting, and not as a committee, but as a full board. That was the date and time we had come up with for talking about specific strategic goals and targets for the current school year.
Looking forward.
All right. And that will be executive session. All right. Thank you, Dr. Dykeman. Sorry again about the alarm, the false alarm I caused. We'll move forward with our board and community reports. We'll start with the Athens Area Community Foundation. Okay. Community Oversight Committee, SPLOS report.
That would be Dr. Yeager and Mr. Davis.
Are there any questions, like for the record, that we can, for Dr. Yeager, in case she goes back and watches this, like we all love to do? Okay. Well, if you have any, you can reach directly out to Dr. Yeager. Envision Athens.
It's pretty short. We have the next search committee meeting for the executive director on November the 8th. And right now we're just still searching for that president and executive director. So I'll have more to report after the next committee meeting.
Thank you. Currently, I don't think I have anything for the Georgia School Boards Association, and I haven't heard anything. I know that you all have shared, all of us have shared, if we're interested in attending the December conference. And so that would really be the only update. Of course, there's another one next summer where we generally, at least pre-COVID, we would take, certain votes on, I think it's on the legislative agenda. Ms. Davis attended that for us this year because it was separated from the conference, but I don't have any additional updates with that. Does anyone else have any updates related to the Georgia School Boards Association?
Julie did share with me, because we kind of discussed this in our last training session, she shared with me a little bit more of the agenda that was out there. So if anybody's interested, I can certainly pass that on. But I think it's also now that on the website itself.
Okay.
For more clarity.
Yeah, if you could just share it, although it's out there, that would be great.
I'll do that.
All right, we have our superintendent / board advisory committee / board / whatever we're trying to make it. I'll just talk just briefly. I know there's a meeting coming up, and the district, Dr. Thomas, as well as Dr. Bonet, help me pronounce your name. Boness, yes. And Mr. Barlament, they have worked very hard to keep me organized and accountable. So Ms. Gallagher and Dr. Dykeman will be attending that. I think I saw where an agenda had been sent out. It is really good to hear, Dr. Anderson, that you all have started that work, because I think in my head I was making it so confusing. But I think once you all are done, I think those themes are really going to help that committee versus that committee having to sift through 700 responses and figure out what was that? 791. So yeah, there's an agenda, and again, we'll talk a little bit more, Miss Gallagher and Dr. Maddox and Dr. Dykeman as far as like our role. But again, the goal is for it to be an advisory committee. One of the things we talked about in our planning meeting recently was that oftentimes the community, they don't really have a straight line to district officials, the superintendent, or board members. Like we'll meet with as many people as we can, but we really don't have any other informal ways outside of those as a collective to sit down and say, hey, what are your thoughts about this without it being filtered through maybe 4 or 5 people? And so I really do think with this goal of creating an infrastructure for communication, two-way communication, I think it really has some potential to get that information to us as a board. So I'm excited. We are sort of building as we go, but I look at it as really laying the infrastructure for us to have those, have the communication. Did I miss anything? All right, we'll move forward with our Student Advisory Council.
Yes. So we did meet, but I'm feeling like we've met since we met. Am I making that up, Emily? Okay, so we did some great activities and team building activities with them. Talked with them about some upcoming tasks that we needed assistance with. Talked to them about some climate and culture things that we have noticed that we would love to get feedback on. And then there was a group that talked to me about I talked first to Attorney Hull about some peer mediation kinds of things and wanted to use that group to get some feedback on that. And also, I think Ms. Davis sent an article about peer tutoring to all of us to look over. So several of those ideas I have shared with that group or will be sharing with them. And so I think that's really the update that we meet monthly. Byron came, Mr. Schooneman came to the last meeting. And because one of the things they wanted to learn more about was funding and how school funding and finances worked. And so he did a training with them on that after Emily led them and Lawrence led them through some team building activities. So it's really going great. We're excited. They have shirts and they're going to be taking pictures and be on the website. So it's great.
Any follow-up questions?
I'm
Or
excited
thoughts?
about that. I don't have a question. I just commend you for getting that going. I think I don't know any of the kids on it yet, but hopefully I'll run into one of them at some point. But just the idea that, we have that voice and that voice is very prominent is so important to where we're going. So thank you.
And we're bringing them so you can meet them. So we're going to do an introduction here of all of them. And so you might know some of the faces. If you don't, you will be knowing them in the future because they are going to be some leaders.
That's awesome. Thank you.
Yes, it's exciting.
Okay. All right. Parent Advisory Board. Anything for that?
No. Ms. Bones has reached out to Mr. Omar Reed is our Parent Advisory Board connection, and we're waiting to hear from him on when that next meeting will be so that we can find out what questions they have for us, things that we can give feedback on and be present.
Okay. And if I'm not mistaken, I think, Ms. Gallagher, that you were going to be a contact for that, or at least attending those. And so that could be shared. And then Ms. Gallagher, of course, if, in your attendance, once those meetings are up, if you feel like you need support, because I know sometimes the meetings can get to be a bit much, just let the board know if we need to move in the direction of rotating. All right, T. Oh, go ahead, Ms. Gallagher.
For that one,
Is it a rotation? It is? Oh, okay. I'm just, my long-term memory tonight is just off. Okay. Corrected again. That is a rotating board.
So there should be a schedule then if we're rotating, right? So everybody will know when they're supposed to go.
So on the email that I got a while ago, it says that the meeting was on 11/2. I was sad I didn't make that one. And then there's another one on 11:30. Parent Advisory Board. So I don't think the one on 11:02 happened, but there's another one that said, because there are two of them for November, 11:02 and 11:30.
Okay. And,
Yeah, okay.
and
Yeah,
then once
they're
you
on
all get,
Tuesdays at 6.
oh, okay. Once you get the schedule, if you could, Ms. Gallagher or someone just share it with us as Ms. Davis asked, so we'll know where we need to fill in.
I got it from you.
You did? You got the schedule with all the meeting dates?
The PAB meeting schedule.
The PAB meeting schedule from me.
Yes.
Oh my God.
So we just need to assign board members to
Well,
each
please
month,
find
right?
it
I'm looking at
and,
it. Okay.
and resend it. And can you coordinate that for me?
Okay.
It's just-
There's no meeting in December, and then they don't have any plan for 2022.
They have no plans for 2022 yet?
Not yet. There's not a schedule up.
okay. All right.
I'm gonna resend it to you.
Thank you. um, Teacher advisory board.
So no one's going to be able to hear that when we watch this again.
Elliot, thank you.
We met virtually on October 14th, and the leadership team shared the anonymous survey that they are distributing through all the principals at the schools. And so the teachers will share the results of those at our next meeting.
Super. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you, Ms. Davis. I'm just off tonight, not even reminding people about the microphone.
That wonderful meeting that you already had. So I'm sorry. It feels like we're done, right?
We'll move forward with the board president's report. There are just a couple of items I do want to mention. We do need to talk about the ad hoc committee that we need to create. And I think Ms. Davis shared that with the board. It's been a couple of weeks ago, but there was an email that I had sent originally on the 7th about us discussing the desire of the board and the district to recognize individuals who have contributed significantly. And so we are in need of creating that ad hoc committee. I did do a small paragraph inside of there, but of course, since it's a month later, I said that it could conclude by February the 28th, but I think March the 28th may be more realistic since we are, we're just now having it on our agenda. And Ms. Palmer and Dr. Maddox, I think if you can remind me, I don't think we put a separate action on here for it. So I think we just kept it within the president's report to go ahead and decide. Okay. All right. And so we should appoint that committee now. So volunteers. I'm sorry, Dr. Maddox, Ms. Gallagher.
You had originally asked Mr. Davis and I to be a part of that committee, so I don't know if this changes things or not. I'm not sure where you are.
Are you all still open to doing it?
I thought I was going to be a part of it. So yeah, sure, why not?
I thought we had a conversation that you weren't sure that you wanted to do this, but if you are, then I think that would be perfect. The four of you all.
I would love to.
Okay. All right. So, Mr. Davis, Ms. Gallagher, and Dr. Maddox. And so I'll try to re-forward that, but if you get to it before I do, at the rate I'm going, you will. If you can take that, because that's the committee's charge. Again, it's an ad hoc committee, so it's not a standing committee. We don't have to figure out everything, but we do want to at least get started with how we're going to recognize individuals. And then we'll be moving into the new building. And there were already some some earlier decisions that the board had decided. So thank you all very much. Other items on the report. We do have meetings each Thursday. Just a reminder, most Thursdays, we have one this week, next week, and the following week with the strategic planning. And so just keeping that in mind. I also wanted to ask you quickly, at our last professional development, there was mention of really a need for a refresher on parliamentary procedure as well as policy. And so I wanted to see if you all would be open to that February and March, going back to our third Thursday for those two professional development sessions. If you could check your calendars and see if that works. And Dr. Thomas, if you could check, because I don't know, I want to be sure I'm not conflicting with something with the district. Now, I have not gotten these dates confirmed yet with GSBA, but this I wanted to, because earlier we tended to go towards the third Thursday. I wanted to ask them about that first, and I thought it would be good to have this identified. If they can't do a third Thursday, one of us will reach out the district for another Thursday. Are there any people that are in attendance that cannot do that third Thursday? In February and March.
So the February one is free. For March, it would put us back at 4 meetings because we already had that March 24th scheduled for one of our strategic priority update meetings. So I just want to put that on your radar. So it would require people to do 4 consecutive Thursdays again.
Okay. So third Thursday in February works. Do we want to go for a fourth Thursday in March, or do we want to go with April? Try that third Thursday in April. Do you want me to ask about that?
Yes, ma'am. It's April. I'm trying to see. 4th through the 8th.
Any?
So will we meet on that first Thursday in April?
That's what I was going to ask too. I don't.
Tonight.
Not tonight.
It's not. It's next week. Oh, December.
I can share the one that we have with everybody. I think we shared it.
You did.
And they can all.
Okay. Do you remember? I think we are.
We don't meet on the first Thursday
In April. Okay.
We meet the second and the third. We pushed it.
And I'm assuming maybe we could make the vote be like it is in December, where we could have one regular meeting in April and then make one a PL time. Could we do that, Attorney Pruitt? Okay.
Okay. Yeah. I just want to be sure that we have time carved out for those areas with policy and parliamentary procedure.
This was it. I put it up
So we're meeting in that end of March and the 14th. So we have the 7th, the 21st, and the 28th. Or we could do what was shared. Any thoughts, strong opinions about how we move forward, or never mind, we don't really need a policy professional development? We do? Okay.
That was, yes, ma'am. I recommended one regular meeting and then a second meeting would be our professional learning. So have 2 meetings instead of 3. That was my recommendation.
So how would we do that? Because right now our meeting for April, I thought I only saw one meeting for April and we're meeting in March, or did I?
Yeah, but the work session is really the
Can't
work
see.
session for April is really the last day in March.
Are there two in March though, Lisa?
Turn the March 31st into what now?
Professional development.
Okay. All right. Well, does that work for everyone?
I just leave my Thursdays open.
I'm lost and I can't see. I cannot see it. I'm just pretending.
So
So
I think the options
Just
are
nodding.
to not do a work session for April and only have the meeting and use that March 31st as not a work session, but a professional learning day.
That's
I'm sorry. So there would be the two meetings in March, like normal, the 3rd and the
Mhm.
10th.
right.
Plus the call meeting on the 24th. Oh yeah, in light of that, I would definitely recommend that we would do one regular meeting in April, which could be the 14th. And then the 31st, as Dr. Dykeman said, could be our PL.
is that clear?
Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
So
Is
we
there-
would do what's up there. Wait, Lisa, don't move it yet. It's not gone. Wait. Restore. Yes, that's what we just said.
I know this would be, but this form is for work session.
I know, but just the dates. Let's just look at the dates right now. So it would give us our work session in March and a board meeting in March. Then we would do what was going to be the April work session, make that PL, and then the 14th of April would be our regular meeting.
Are y'all okay with that?
And there's
Again,
also a meeting, I'm
because-
sorry, on the 24th of March. Is that right? Okay.
It is. I would just put out there, I don't think it's a deal breaker for the policy committee, but we do have a meeting that on the 17th. So that would be every Thursday in March. For us.
Okay. All right. Well,
Yeah, we'll be there Thursday, based on what we're talking about now.
Right.
Plus call.
so okay. So here's an option. Our retreat, typically we like to have it around January and then one in the summer. We can we can possibly push that policy to be incorporated with the summer retreat. If you all feel okay with that, or if you're feeling like you need something sooner.
I don't know when we're gonna have the discussion on policy or committee structure, period.
It's tonight.
Oh, well, yeah, we may not even have that meeting on the 17th then.
All right. So
So I mean, I'm fine with that. I was just looking at the calendar and wanted to put it out there since Dr. Yeager and Mr. Davis weren't here either. But yeah, we can have that discussion because it may be a moot point after we vote.
okay. So are you saying we need to have it before?
I'm
We need to
saying-
go ahead and schedule it before. Is that what you're saying?
I'm saying what my initial point was that with the policy committee meeting on March the 17th, there would be a meeting every Thursday in March, even without just the schedule. I mean, with the schedule, but there will be an additional policy committee meeting. But now what I'm saying is, since we may have discussion and change our committee structure, we may not even have a committee meeting because we may not have a policy committee. So
sense.
we would be flexible. That would be free. That would be a free evening.
Okay. All right. So I have the third Thursday in February works, and then March 31st. And possibly, as Ms. Hull said, that 17th may or may not be a free meeting. So, we may not have a whole lot of meetings or meetings every Thursday. Does that work for everyone? Is anyone
So
still?
there were 2 or 3 meetings that you're scheduling for this profession, for the board development, right?
Mhm.
Thursday, February, and March 31st now are the 2 days.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
For policy and for parliamentary. And these are the dates I'm going to use to reach out to GSBA. Again, if something changes, I'll circle back around, but it seems to be easier to decide on these when we're all together.
Thank you. That's great.
And then related to that, last year or earlier this year, I think last year we attempted to sort of plan our retreat in January, but I think we ended up having it in, was it end of January or February, Ms. Palmer, or does anyone remember? It was the 29th and 30th. And so we do need to plan a day for a retreat. I'm sorry, I know this is like meeting on top of meeting, but trying to at least have these in order so that we can at least carve out time, especially given different things. So we'll at least carve out time to spend with each other, and then also to be sort of on par with what boards do across the state. And so is there a preference for day for our retreat in January? Will a Saturday work? Do you prefer Friday, Saturday? We've done it a few different ways. Or do you not want a retreat?
So yeah, I was going to say, is there a particular thing that we're doing in this retreat?
That agenda would probably be built, but it'll be similar to the last time. It'll probably be some team building, some strategic area, some focus on strategic areas. And then I don't know if you recall, but probably over a year ago, the board was asked about different professional developments that they were interested in that really fell outside of like Georgia School Board Association, like the things that really we have to do from a governing standpoint. And so that agenda will be suggested and built, but it would include things like that. Probably a professional development or topic area, a strategic area, and then some team building.
Have we worked into our schedule yet the 4 meetings with the superintendent that we discussed? That's already on the calendar. Okay, I'm not familiar with that, but okay.
I'm okay if we don't have a retreat. I mean, I want to put it out there because it is a board decision.
So when is the GSBA conference in the summer? Is that June, July timeframe?
I think it's around June.
So perhaps we could do our board retreat at the GSBA conference. I don't know. Just a thought.
Could you say that again? I'm sorry.
Perhaps we could do our board retreat at the GSBA conference
That is a wonderful idea.
in
That is
June.
wonderful.
Okay. All right. I think I hear from the board, you all, that's what you, okay. And I'll be reaching out to see if, well, I guess I should, Dr. Thomas, is that something you're attending?
Sure.
You're invited.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I didn't even. Okay. All right. So 10th and the 11th, I will, myself or Dr. Maddox or Dr. Thomas will reach out regarding the planning of that. We may, ask for some help or ideas as well, just so that we can be sure that it's reflective of, all of the things that we want to see. Okay. All right. So we will move forward with the retreat around the time that we'll be at the Savannah conference. And just another note, Dr. Maddox will also be reaching out. Ms. Hall, I know this was something else that you had brought up about mentoring. And so if you would be on the lookout for a call or an email from her, making those pairs official. And I think that's it. Dr. Thomas, Superintendent's report.
Yes, ma'am. And mine is pretty quick because we have a couple of presentations that will come next. Just wanted to give one update on the staff who have submitted paperwork for the vaccine incentive. We've had 1,948 staff people out of 2,400. So that's right at 81% of our staff have submitted. So I think that's positive. We're excited about that. Dr. Blankenship gave me the latest update today. So that's really, really good. So, we don't know. I mean, if you're down to 20%, you can have people with medical problems and exemptions and reasons that they're physically unable. So, I mean, that feels like that's a really good number that we are excited about. So I wanted to share that. And I already shared with you our plan, what I thought was our plan for early Head Start. And I want to give you now a revised plan because this is what happens when we give you things in advance. This is why we wait sometimes to the day of because things happen. But the recommendation had initially been that we would put 8 pre-K classrooms at the Whitehead Annex and 8 at Gaines. However, my zone of expertise is not nutrition and food services. And in talking to Miss Paula Farmer, I think in my mind, feeding the kids there was just as simple as putting food in a bag and taking it from Whitehead Road up the hill to the Whitehead Annex. And it's not that simple. There are some legal regulations that you have to go by, and we can't just put food in a bag every day. They need warm food. Such simple things that you just kind of don't think about. And so in order to make that happen, there were a lot of things we would need, like serving lines put in at Whitehead Annex, a new refrigerator system, warmers, preparation stations, because that kitchen is very outdated. So the recommendation from Ms. Farmer was that, and we would have to have staff there to maintain that, as well as staff at Gaines. So the recommendation today, very similar, but would be that we would have all of those classrooms at Gaines because it would keep us from having to re-outfit an entire kitchen. The kitchen there at Gaines is current, so we could utilize what's there. It would be one set of school nutrition staff. And it does also help with us having to have an additional admin type person hired and a receptionist person for the Whitehead Annex. So those would be cost savings. Cost adds would be that we will now have to update an additional wing at Gaines because we had the space that our community engagement team is currently in, and we were going to have to do some changes. But even in that, Karen thought, oh, we'll just switch the toilets out and make them urinals. And Mr. Gilbert taught her that that's not her zone of expertise. You just can't take them out and put another one in. There's some plumbing that goes. So we've learned a lot about what we don't know through this process. But it seems that it will cost us more. But when you balance out the other costs that would happen at the annex, it should not be an exorbitant amount of money to get an additional wing ready at Gaines. And we would be able to get that first set of classes in starting with 8, which would help to meet the requirements of the grant, get those in earlier in the spring, and then have the other half ready by August 1, like beginning of school opening. So very similar to what I said, but instead of being split, all of those classes would be at the Gaines building. And in regards to West Broad, and I said this in my communication with you all, we are staying optimistic about identification of a viable usage for that space, looking still objectively at what partnerships we can utilize, and we'll continue to work with the board and the community to explore options in terms of renovating the space there and identifying an appropriate use. So when we, once we get this done, which was kind of more urgent, so we would not lose the grant, then we'll be able to shift our attention to next steps returning in regards to West Broad, and we can do that with an entire board meeting dedicated to that discussion. Are there any questions that I can answer? Yes, ma'am.
So in the original document you gave us, we still had early learning at West Broad. Are you telling me that that's off the table now, or?
We had early learning at West Broad as a potential usage for long-term, and that's still a potential usage for long-term. But right now, it was not there for this grant, like right now. So the temporary right now is the same as it was in this, except instead of being at the annex and Gaines, it'll all just be at Gaines. And then what we had there was that hopefully in the next 9 to 18 months, we could look at a potential usage of West Broad as a space for early Head Start. So it's still a potential option, but we will have to go through and again vet and see what we're able to do in terms of space needs for the program and then availability of space at West Broad.
So I really, I need a bigger discussion on this one for sure, because I don't think that we want to do the third time not carrying out the board's desires to build the early learning center at West Broad. Because again, this is, to me, this is 3 times we've gone through the cost of determining what it would take to do this for the 3 different proposals we've had for that site. I count that as money lost, because we've not acted on any of those. And I believe that a number came up around $300,000 for this last effort to still not bring it to fruition. So I really want us to examine that from a fiscal responsibility perspective and also a use of funds. We have a commitment to do it there. We had a possibility of doing it there. We were presented with 2 different ways of doing it there. And I don't understand why we're not following through. So yes, I would like to see a different discussion about West Broad.
Yes, and I can say we're not doing it now because the physical space does not meet the operational needs of the program with the desires that the board has shared that they would like to have, which is to maintain both buildings. And so what our goal is to try to find a way, and I don't know, I mean, and I don't want to get into that now. I would be making up an answer, right?
So I don't want you to do
So,
that. So
you know,
for sure,
what
but I
right.
really need for us to have that serious discussion where we
Yes.
only are talking about that. And again, in the presentation that was given to us, we were given options of a 2 building and a 3 building, and we were given a cost for a 3 building. And so what I'm hearing you say now is that's not valid, or was it?
No, what you were given initially was showing a 2 building and a 3 building, and then the pros and cons of what that would do for the program.
Right.
Based on my conversations with the program experts, it was not the most efficient and instructionally sound way to do that. So we did present a 2 building option of keeping Minor Street and Campbell Street and adding a 3rd. And then we presented an option which would keep Minor Street and add that 2nd building. And after we went through the, weighing the pros and cons, so we're really in the same spot we've been in. I made a recommendation a month or so ago based on the recommendations and inputs that I received from the people who would have to implement that instruction. I made that recommendation, a decision was made by the board, and so we then were in a position of, we want to try to maintain that grant, and we're moving forward with that. So we did show what those 2 options were, but with those options, we also showed what the challenges and what the benefits would be. And that still has not changed. So now we have to determine, is there something else we can do? Can we reduce the number of classes? Can we reduce the footprint? What would happen if we went from 16 classes to 10 classes? If we did that, where would the other 6 classes go? If we went from 16 to 10, would that allow us the green space that we need to meet the play time for students, the space that we need to meet parking and turning? And so we now have to evaluate what else can we do. So no, we're not saying that that's off the table, but what we are saying is, based on the feedback that we received by way of vote from the board, now we have to go back and see, what is there something we can do to find a place of compromise where we're able to honor the desire to have that as an early learning space, and also support those who have to work there every day and make that a positive workspace for those teachers and those students. So that's where we are now. And in all honesty, I have not been able to dedicate time to problem solving that, because my priority was, we really need to find a space to get these early learning classes so we don't lose those grants. So
And those grants were a total of how much?
15 million, Karen, is that right? For 5 years.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the number.
$15 million from the
15
early
million
Head
over
Start.
5
Yes.
years.
So and really more than the money is losing the educational opportunity for children. and the opportunity to have early literacy and family support for children. So to turn away 16 classrooms of instruction was just not something that we wanted to do as an educational entity. We felt like we needed to do what we needed to do at the time to make that happen and not lose that grant. Now that we hopefully are in a space where we can do that, then we can now go back and start looking at now what does this mean next in terms of the West Broad property.
So I guess what I'm hearing you say is the 3 building option was not ever really an option.
It's an option if you don't know. Yeah, I guess that's what you're hearing. I mean, no, I don't. So we were asked to make a recommendation, and we made a recommendation that was a 2 building option. When I made that recommendation of the 2 building option, Ms. Davis asked me to be transparent about what were all the things we had considered. So, and I think that's where a lot of the confusion came up. So when I was asked to provide that transparency through property committee, is what I think it was called at the time, of what did we consider, then we went back and put all of those things on the table in full transparency to say, we looked at this, we looked at this, we looked at this. And so that's how the 3 building concept came out. I never presented that with any intentions of presenting that as an option to the community, and I never communicated it that way to the community. But what I did was responded to what our chair asked me to do, which was be transparent about everything we looked at. So the only option that I brought forth was the 2 building option based on the feedback that I received from Ms. Higginbotham and her team. Then we showed the 3rd, and then it became a narrative of, well, you gave us 2 options, but I didn't. I just responded to a request from a committee chair. The option we brought forth, we were bringing forth all along to property committee, was the 1-2 building option that allowed us the space to do what we needed to do with 2 playgrounds and to support the needs of mobility and back and forth. But when I was asked to show everything we looked at and how did we derive at the decision that we reached, that was how that other visual came to be. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's how we got to where we were.
So let me state that the questions from the property committee were driven by community concerns about protecting the historic significance of that entire property. That is why we asked the question. What the property committee did learn is that there has never been an exploration of keeping all 3 buildings. We heard in your presentation that the cost to maintain or to keep all 3 buildings would increase the cost of the early learning solution by about $3 million. That's what I heard. And community members that I talked to also heard that same report. So again, it's a communication issue that we have here, because the interest from the community, and certainly if I can add my personal interest in that, is again preserving the 3 building site as it because of its historic and cultural significance to this entire community. And what I'm hearing you say today is that, as I read the document that you sent, there was still an early learning, but you're now saying preschool as a possibility to go into that space. But again, are we going into that space with the view of preserving the historic significance of the entire site? And if we're not, then we don't have the cost for doing this. And so we are starting over again in terms of expending funds to build something at that space. And I think the preservationists in this community will continue to ask that critical question: what does it take to preserve that site and make it the early Head Start or the Head Start or some school function or a school in some nature, because that is what it is. Thank you.
I have to say, I'm flabbergasted by this. Like, I'm really confused about why that communication breakdown happened from the policy committee to this full board of just saying this is really not an option. Like, that was never clearly stated. This is really not an option. And what we heard as a board and what I believe we voted on was, you can do a 3-building option, and these are going to be the costs and benefits. If you get to save the building, this is what happens. That's what I heard. I didn't hear, no, this is not, we're not going to go forward with it at all if the 2-building option doesn't get voted. That's not what I heard. And so I have to say, honestly, like, I don't know where the breakdown in communication happened, but I'm really disappointed to hear this now versus 3 months ago when we could have voted possibly differently or had some other discussions about it in more with more transparency in the communication between policy committee and this full board.
And I do think that's why it's
Property.
important that we have those meetings as a whole, because that was a lot of the discussion that clearly the whole board didn't have all of the background context on. And so we had, like, it's like Ms. Davis said, I mean, those conversations took place and we came forward, and I heard and still hear and respect the desire to maintain the historical integrity and to honor what that property stood for. But yeah, that was what I just said now was a conversation that took place multiple times prior to the vote. So,
And I'm sorry.
yes, ma'am. Mhm.
I was going to say the property committee didn't be really clear. The property committee makes no decisions whatsoever. We simply say bring it forward to the full board. And so again, the property committee understood the recommendation to be a 2-building solution where 2 buildings were going to be destroyed and only 1 building was going to be left. And that is why we pushed it back to say, what does it take to save these other buildings, right? And so we did not even understand at the recommendation that the 3rd building still hadn't been looked at as a potential, that it was simply, it was a wash. It was never even brought into the discussion. But we did hear from other people and preservationists, and I'll go, we had professionals that brought us this position that all 3 buildings could be saved. And so it was a question of whose eyes are we looking through?
Mhm.
And so from a preservationist perspective, we had the dean of the College of Architecture and Design speak to us and say, it can be done. She came here and she shared that information with us. And so we thought that that had been a part of the conversation and the preparation for bringing the information to the community so that the community could hear and so that the board could hear what the possibilities were. So literally in the presentation, and I'll own that it's what I wanted to hear. I wanted to hear there was a 3-building solution and that we could save the property intact and that there would be a cost to do that. And that cost was $3 million. So that didn't sound like a lot of money to me, considering what we spend on other buildings. So literally, yes, I was very concerned when I learned at the meeting that there was never going to be a 3-building solution presented. And so I tried to amend the agenda because I thought that the motion, so that we could definitely give you the space to go back and explore that 3-building solution. Well, my motion died. We took the vote and we ended up not voting for the 2-building solution, which would have eliminated both buildings. And so that's where we are today.
And Ms. Gallagher, I know your hand was up, and I'll say, anything, and we've heard this from community, we've heard this from the historic preservationists, anything can be done. So yes, we can maintain all three buildings, and yes, there would be a cost. And for us, yes, we have to consider cost, but bigger than cost, we need to consider functionality. So yes, we can definitely do it. Yes, we can keep all of the buildings there. But then for us, the decision was made based on functionality of the program and what was needed for early learning and to support that. And so I think that's where the rub has been, because you're right. We do have people telling us it can be saved, and they're right. It can be, and we can make that happen. And can we make that happen and provide Ms. Higginbotham and her team with what they need to have a efficiently ran program? As of the information we currently have, no. And so then we're having to back and say, okay, what changes can we make? And that's where our next discussion will be, after we take care of this early head start, is what else can we do? Is there another way to accommodate that? Again, can we downsize? What does that mean? Can we just use the two buildings? And how many classrooms could we put there if we just use Campbell Street and Minor Street? If we did that, where could we put the other classrooms? Can we maybe leave half the classrooms at Gaines and put half the classrooms there and not do a third building? Those are now conversations we will have to have. So when I'm asked, are we saying, no, it can't go there? No, I'm not saying that. What I am saying is it can't go there with our 16 classroom original recommendation. Well, let me not say that. It can go there, because I don't want someone to say Dr. Thomas said it can't. It can go there, but it can't go there in a way that is fair to the teachers and staff who have to work that space every day. And going into a building is one thing. If we have a space there that's already a space and we're making it work, and we say, well, we can make it work, but it's going to be inconvenient. But if you're going into it and spending $5 or $6 million, you need to make it be what you need it to be, and don't build something that you know is going to create hindrances. And that's where we are. So our next step will be to see what can we utilize that physical space that we have and still support the early learning needs that we have, where we can be a mutual gain. So that's.
And so I'm hearing you say that, yes, if you have those conversations, then it sounds like we're having to start over, because we've never considered saving all three buildings. And so we don't know what it would look like if we were designing it to save all three buildings.
Well, we do, because we went back and did that based on the request. When we were looking at options and when it came back from the community, we really want to save Campbell Street. We did go back and look at it and have done extensive work around that. And what we learned in doing that work was it doesn't work well for 16 classes. What we haven't done now is said, can we make it work for a reduced number of classes? So we have done that work. That's how we were able to get a cost figure and able to identify the challenges that the early head start team was able to look through and say, can we work through this? But what we now haven't done is said, okay, what are our options if we reduce those classes? Because all along we were trying to make the entire grant fit on that space.
Right.
And that's what we don't feel that we can do in an efficient way. So now we have to go back and say, well, is there something else we can do?
So I just want to make it, again, because I thought I had finally zeroed in on this. You're saying that even in that discussion of the three buildings, what you presented was saving all three buildings, or was it saving
No,
two
saving
buildings
two
and
and
adding a
building
third
one.
building?
Saving two of the buildings and adding a third building.
Okay.
And that was when we were asked, what did we consider? So our initial recommendation was to save Minor Street, build a new building, have the two play areas, have the outdoor classroom space, and have the space that was needed for parking and the access to large equipment vehicles. When we were asked, what else did we consider? That's when we came back, because the community asked about Campbell Street. And that's when we showed Minor Street, Campbell Street, and the third building
building.
that was our second building. Yes. And so then we showed all of those and said, this is what it would look like. This is what we would have to place where. These were the considerations, and this is why I'm making the recommendation that I'm making. Now we're saying, okay, let's get the grant out. We need to save the grant. Where can we put it? And then once we do that, let's go back and look again and see if we kept Minor Street and Campbell Street, and potentially, which in our minds, it would have to still be a new building. Is there a way we could downsize that new building and still have the green space? Is there a way we could do something else and not have to go up and down the ramp every day? Is there a way? But all of those things, and we know we can't do that with those 16 classrooms. Not in a way that is, again, efficient for the instructional operations of the day-to-day work of the building. So now we just have to see, can we reduce? Can we modify what our recommendations are? And that's where we will go back to the team and look at that after we get this early Head Start part taken care of.
Ms. Gallagher. You can.
Hey.
Looks like a ninja.
Okay, so you said it'll be at Gaines, but only 8 classrooms, not the full 16.
All 16 will
All
now go to
16.
Gaines. The original recommendation was that 8 would go to the Whitehead Annex
Okay.
and 8 would go to Gaines. But after feedback from Ms. Farmer, we're going to put all 16 at Gaines. And at this moment, that is a temporary location, but it gets us within the requirements of the grant and allows us to keep the grant.
And that's early learning, so 1 through 3 still.
No,
Not
it's-
pre-K.
Not necessarily. So depending on what we're able to do space-wise now, we're having to make shifts. So Ms. Higginbotham will have to look at what we can do with those classrooms. And that was going to be the case even at Whitehead. What we were looking at doing was moving pre-K out of Early Learning Center here, putting them at Gaines and Whitehead, and putting early learning there, because you can make because the requirements,
Right.
with early Head Start are a lot more stringent than with pre-K. So what we have to do now that we're looking at putting all 16 classrooms there, and Mr. Gilbert is working frantically on that as we speak, is seeing what modifications we're able to make in that space the most economical way possible. And then we will make the shifts we need to make. So we may end up having to put pre-K there and put all of early learning here because it's easier to adapt these classrooms. So those are decisions we're going to have to make after we get in and look at plumbing and all those kinds of things.
Okay, and the reason why I was asking is because the number of children to teacher ratio is different depending on age. So if we're going to do pre-K, we could serve more students than we could with
Exactly. Yes, and we
little
talked
kids.
about that today. So yes.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank
You're
you.
right. You're on it.
I have just a couple of things.
Yes, ma'am.
In light of the updates. I'm very happy, actually, echoing what Dr. Maddox said, that those classrooms are going to be, that we are going to have some accessibility on the east side. I am thinking though, like, what about like the Whitehead, and what, and so I think and I know all of that is operational only until it comes up to what we spend on it, and if it goes over. But I know that would be a question I had as a parent. That would be a question I had with everything being right here. What about the east side, and what about the far west side? And so putting them there, I guess my just sort of running thoughts in hearing this now is I'm wondering, like, the cost, but then also once we get it there, to me, I'm thinking about like the families, right? And so if this ever comes back to being something related to West Broad, and I actually think at this point they almost have to be separate, because we are going sort of in a different direction. I know the hope is that we'll merge them back together, but a lot can change, like in a year or two. Families will get used to having those classrooms on that side, and then the money that we spent, it's like, well, then what happens after that? Like when we move them back to West Broad, or do we move like half the classes?
Right.
And then,
Right.
so I definitely get the complexity, because there have been a lot of different things decided about the property. And And I know it's hard to sort of consider them separately, but so it's just sort of two concerns I want to register. One is that they all will be on the east side, just like, same concerns if they were all on the west side. And then like, where do we really go from a standpoint of funding, right? Like if these are going to come back over, I get what we're saying, like we can use that, I'm guessing the grant money because it's 5 years. That says that then within these next 5 years, we would have come back, the board would have come back and said, okay, yeah, we're going to, switch some classes around. And so it seems, I know it's temporary, but it seems more permanent. And actually I think I thought that too, even when they were on the east and west side. It's like, how does this eventually even, like for the long-term things, what really does this look like? And then what do we do with those spaces that we've already spent money on? Is it that maybe we hope for another grant? I know we're really, effective in that area as far as securing grants. Do we even expand it, and say that, we're going to have a, person who solely writes grants and secures, this funding,
right.
so that we can expand and keep these early Head Start places everywhere. So those are just some general concerns. One of which just sort of came when you updated us about
And the
putting
one
them
thing
there.
we can keep in mind is that there still will be a west side because we still will have early learning. We're not closing this down here.
Okay.
So we will still have classrooms back here, which is currently the only early learning site in the county.
Okay.
So now it will actually balance that out, right, Karen? So you'll still have the west side early learning center, which is right back here, and then you will have classrooms on the east side. So at least there still will be a east-west balance. It just would have been before 2 west sides and 1 east, because it would have been Whitehead Annex and this space as the 2 west sides. So there still will be an east-west, but the question of what happens with that space next then is a really good question. And and there's been, and I hate to even bring up things because you say something and it like grows legs, right? But there have been so many conversations even before I was in this position about maybe doing like with the growth of some of our schools. So let's just say Gaines. Now let me say, I'm not saying we're doing this. Where's the camera? I'm not saying we're doing this, but this is like possibilities. There have been conversations about maybe moving pre-K and K to a building and opening up more space and getting kids out of mobiles and doing like a elementary primary kind of model. So there, those are things, not things that I'm saying we're doing, but those are possibilities where when you have that space there are things you can still do. So you could maybe have a pre-K center and then have a K-5 building and pull those pre-K rooms out of Gaines and let's just say Whit or Gaines and Barnett Shoals, put them in that building and then open up more space for other programming needs in those elementary classrooms. So those are just examples, nothing at all definitive, but those are things that we can consider in the long term of how to meet those needs. Or as you said, go for other grants. What else is out there? Who knows? We talk a lot about community partnerships. Maybe there are partners in the community that can come and do something in the way of early learning or something and utilize that space and work with us. So you're right. I don't want us to ever spend money and then a space sit dormant. So it's going to be about visionary and innovative thinking about how we program. We talk about redistricting. That's the word no one ever wants to talk about. But maybe can we avoid that on the east side if we pull out and did a primary school there and an elementary school at Gaines? So I think that's where we have to start looking creatively at what options are.
But right now, it's about the money on the table, it's like this grant that we have on this table. I feel like it's just confusing so many different things where we need to be, for me, settle on.
Your mic's not on.
Oh, yeah.
Settle for what we're gonna do with
You didn't
the
turn
grant that we have on this table.
It's not on.
It's not on.
It's on?
Settle for-
I can't hear her.
It's not
You
on.
can't hear.
Oh,
Okay.
Settle for, what are we gonna do with the grant money that's on the table right now that there's a, okay, another mic. settle for utilizing the money that we have right now, that we have to decide what needs to happen by a deadline. And then we do that and not even make any promises about West Broad or no other school. Just what are we going to do with this money right now? And then we talk about that later, because if we don't have the money, can't see the money, we shouldn't even be talking about the money, because that's just going to bring more division in the community. I want us to get to a place where we can really solidify what are we doing with the $16 million, or was it 15 million or $16 million?
Oh.
The only thing that I wanted to clarify is, yes, this is a 5-year grant that we reapply for annually, just like our early Head Start grant. But at the end of 5 years, we have the opportunity to continue. You're not reapplying as long as we do our due diligence and continue to meet all of the requirements of the grant and offer early learning. Then we have a continuation without contest. And so it's not just this 113 kids in the first year and families. It's 113 years for these 5 years, plus continuing on as we continue to do what we need to do to serve kids well. But it also prepares them for entering our school district.
So
So-
while you're there, Karen,
Ma'am.
I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, I certainly get that. I do think it would be helpful. I know, Dr. Thomas, you mentioned that you all have to get in the building, you have to see what's what. I think having that information, like what that final plan is, will be helpful for the board. Like after you have, if this is it, that's fine. But it sounds like we don't know quite yet which classes are going to be where. And I think that could be
Yes,
helpful.
we'll definitely get that to you, as well as a cost. Because before we make any real move forward, we need to see, if we get in and we think it's going to cost $500,000 and it's $5 million, we're going to, whoa, hold on. Like, we got to do a cost benefit analysis and see. So as soon as we're able to, Mr. Gilbert is anticipating having numbers next week. And once we have those numbers and know about plumbing and all of those things, then Ms. Higginbotham can let us know which classrooms that will work for. And we should be able to have something to you by next month's board meeting.
So,
Ms. Davis?
thank you. And even once we get this done, what will our unmet need be in this county for the services that we're providing at this?
Yeah, I can get that back to you, but we know that we're significantly below the early childhood needs of our community. Is that we could have multiple grants of this size and still not be quite meeting the needs of our community.
So the last time I went to a GCAP meeting, I think it was, or whatever, the unmet need was over 6,000 children in this county. So this 123 that we're serving is just 123 of 6,000. And so I don't want us to think that this solution is the end of the need. And so I would ask us to, and I'm not asking you to do this, and maybe we need to find out if the education committee for Envision Athens or somebody can take this on. But somebody really needs to sit down and say, with that type of need and all of the data coming to us saying that this is the answer to children coming into our school system prepared and ready to learn, how can this community actually address that? It is insane that we are talking about $15 million to serve 123 children. I think that, again, if that's what it costs, that's what it costs. But I want some other creative minds to look at what do we do to meet this unmet need. I also want some expertise around preservation to look at the equity issue that we are addressing or leaving on the table year after year when we come forward with recommendations on how to bring that equity into our facilities and a cultural change that is necessary in this community. So there's work to be done. We may not be the people to do that, and I'm certainly willing to stand up and say, I don't have any expertise. I just have a lot of passion about this. And so I want us to hire the expertise to make the decisions and make the recommendations absent our biases so that we can move forward. I've been on this board for 8 years. We have not brought a solution forward that we have executed. It is time to stop. And at $300,000 a pop to look at it, we are squandering taxpayers' money, in my opinion.
Ms. Gallagher, and is there anyone else after this? If not, we'll move forward. Ms. Gallagher?
Okay, so this is just my last thing, and I said it before, so I like data. So if at some point we could be collecting data on the actual impact of this kind of programming on student growth and development as they matriculate through our system, I think that would be helpful, especially if this is something that's going to come back every 5 years.
Yes, ma'am. And it's in our community assessment, which should be part of your board packet over time.
What's
But
in
we
the-
also do the presentations annually that we
What's
bring
in the-
forward. Our community assessment, which includes the numbers of students that are served in our community and the lack of seats that we have in our community.
That's not
But
what I'm
within
talking
that, it
about.
also has the data for our students in our work. What we're also working on collecting is correlating that longitudinal data, which
Mhm.
is included but not as easily accessible.
So we don't actually have that data
We do,
available.
yes, ma'am.
So we can see
not for this
what the impact of this programming is on like a 12th grader.
For those students who have been within our programming, yes.
And where can that data be requested?
We'll send that your direction for what we have. Of course, the latest we have is our pre-K data with our 9th graders that was published, and we can forward that to you.
Pre-K and 9th grade?
Our students who have been through our programming, being through 9th or through pre-K, there is and they're in 9th grade when the study was published.
And then what do we do with that data? Like, how are we improving our programming? Are we?
Yes, ma'am, we go through the data process with our students as well as in trying to ensure that we are closing gaps for our students
And then so the
and that they're
community and the board goes to find that data, or is that regularly shared publicly?
it's regularly shared. The community assessment data is shared annually,
But not the
both
data
on our
that's-
site and with the board.
But not the data part that I'm asking about.
Oh, yes, ma'am. That's, yeah. And it was also a published, Dr. Stacy Newharth Pritchett, who
Mhm.
works at the University of Georgia, worked with us and has actually published articles off of that data.
So I've actually seen that data as a board member. I don't
Mhm.
remember when I last saw it, but again, it was laid out and it showed even like from the kids that went through the early learning center or that process, how they fared in I think it was first, second, and third grade. I've actually seen those reports. Now, I haven't looked at them every year, but I have seen those reports and they were presented to us again to continue to, they have to do this because this is right from the start and they require it. And so they have to report this out to the state. It's there. So we know that this is important. And everything I pick up is telling us again that this is a critical need. And I think there's even been a shift from the state and the federal level around the early learning and the assessments and stuff. So this is
Where is it again?
We'll send it your direction.
I know you're asking for more long-term. I know
Mhm.
when I was at the elementary level, we would always look at that data and
Mm-hmm.
compare our kids who went through our pre-K program and then their performance like K1, 2, and their reading. So we would look at that data regularly and it was a marked difference. And I think a lot of that just has to do with access to whether it's homeschooling or pre-K schooling, right? So for many of our families, that is where their children are able to get those early literacy skills. But we would look at that data regularly, annually, really, of kids that went through our pre-K. And Mr. Hull was always really excited to look at that data with us and say, okay, if they went through our pre-K, what have they done K1, K1, 2? But it sounds like you're wanting that, like if they did early Head Start or pre-K, and then maybe where do they even end up, like at graduation point,
Right.
or at,
So
and we can look at that. There's so many other factors that then come, and that come into play. I think that early reading is really what tells us a lot.
And,
I would-
and may I just intervene really quick,
Yes,
Mr.
yes, we
Gaskins?
got a lot left.
Yeah,
to
and I
cover.
think because we don't have an action item related to this next week. And I do think it is, I mean, it obviously is a topic that we all have strong feelings about. And once you bring forth the recommendation for the Gaines property or Head Start, how we're going to use the money and all of those details right now, I would suggest that we may be at a better place to start these conversations back up. But I don't, because it's been throughout my tenure on the board, we've had these conversations and they've gone in circles and people are passionate. That doesn't change, but decisions still have to be made. So I want to be sure, I sort of try to strike the balance between us being able to have these open conversations, but also looking at our agenda and understanding we don't have to take action. And it sounds like the district has already decided we're going to move forward with a recommendation so that we can not just use the money that we have, but also meet a need. And so if I could encourage us to move forward, I'm not saying we can't talk about it, but we have talked about it for about 20 or 30 minutes and we're not going to have to take action on it.
Can I hear?
Mr. Gaskins,
Yeah.
if you say that.
I'm
Thank
afraid.
you.
I'm afraid now. I was just
Go.
going to add that we can research and find longitudinal data, but I wanted to just focus that early childhood programs and pre-K, their purpose is for readiness. So really the most dynamic data is how those students enter kindergarten and first grade ready compared to families that don't have, literacy in books and are learning math at home. So I think the most dynamic data that we will find is really the data that is in our kindergarten, our first grade classes for students that attended pre-K compared to students that did not attend pre-K. So we'll provide both data sets for you.
This is not about that, so I'll wait.
Go ahead.
This is a little baby question just in terms of the superintendent report. Will we have any type of presentation or data from Dr. Welch? I know that he came a while back. Will that be, is that forthcoming?
Yes,
And you don't
so
have to
we
give
will-
it now.
Yes, and so what we've done is broken down all of our strategic priorities, and we trying to kind of give y'all a little breathing room. So we do a couple at these meetings, and
Okay.
then like the meeting we have coming up soon. And so I'm not sure offhand when Dr. Watley is presenting, but that is on part.
Okay, she said at the call board meeting, we'll do an update on culture and
In
climate
2 weeks.
in
There
2
you go.
weeks.
There's your answer.
Thank you.
And the heat is on. He sent me a picture, so that is the smell, and the heat's working. So we should.
Okay.
Not that you're cold or anything, but I know. So now we got to wait a minute for it to.
Yeah. I was smelling gas. I was like, I'm smelling something. Dr. Thomas, were there any questions and does that conclude your report or you have more?
Yes, ma'am. My report was 5 minutes, and that was an hour ago. I'm so sorry.
Okay.
This is why I don't make bets with Dr. Anderson anymore.
Okay, so we are going to move forward and we have 3 areas that will probably have some robust conversation. So first we'll start with our Cognia update.
My name's Emily Boness. It's nice to see you all. I have been the Strategic Projects Director for 2 months and 3 days, and I have enjoyed it, and I am looking forward to speaking with you this evening and at future board meetings as well. So James Barlament and I have been working on giving you a brief update about Cognia. If you'll remember, he worked with you all on this last year. So I wanted to just tell you about where we are now. Cognia last visited virtually in December of 2020. At that time, they reviewed 3 leadership standards, and leadership standard 1.4 moved from the initiating to improving. So that is not on the table for this upcoming review. However, leadership standard 1.5 and 1.7 are still in the initiating stages and will be the subject of this upcoming review. Somewhere. This graph, this tells you where you have been. So if you'll see back in January 2020, there were 5 standards, and then 2 of them were met. And so 3 of them were in December of 2020 reviewed. 1 of them dropped off, that 1.4. And so again, this just provides you with a visual as well as some key steps for December 2021. The Cognia monitoring review has multiple components. One is a written progress report. James and I are working on that now. That will link to documents and meetings reviews. The Cognia review team will look through agendas. They will watch YouTube videos of the meetings as part of their review. And then there is the virtual site visit, which happens on Thursday, December 2nd. The lead evaluator this time around is Bill Craig. We have spoken with him, and he shared this schedule with us. You will see up there that you will be meeting with either Bill or one of the other 2 members of the review team. These are the times that they have assigned you. However, of course, if it doesn't work, we can work to move you all around. It's 45 minutes for each of your individual interviews. I think last time that you were in groups, but they have 3 folks doing the review, so they'll be able to interview you individually. In the afternoon, there is a principal group, which we will, of course, set up, and then there are a community and parent group. That parent group will be broken into 2 separate groups. They want to have up to about 15. And I'm asking for you to send us any names of folks that you would like to invite to participate. I will get my email address out to you tomorrow. Again, we're looking for up to 9 community members and 15 parents. So we'll need to invite more than that because of scheduling, of course. And if you send those names with their email addresses, we will invite them to participate. As a quick reminder, the leadership standard 1.5, you can see it up there. They offered 1 specific directive that needed to be worked on for this past year. Same with 1.7, 1 specific directive that was to be worked on this past year. So James and I are, of course, going through all of the agendas and writing the work that has been done with respect to these directives in the report. And I imagine that's what the review team will talk to you about. That's it. Are there any questions?
I have just one. So with regard to Directive 1.7, were we to move away from committees and vote on that and approve that, would now this directive be moot and not a part of the December 2nd discussion, or would it still be on the table?
So I read this advisory committee to refer to the advisory committee referenced in the board policy. And that is the committee that is meeting next Wednesday and that you all voted on the approval from the last meeting. It is not in my reading of the Cognia report that came out in January 2021. I didn't read about that, but if someone else has a different
Yes.
interpretation.
No, you're right.
No, but you're right.
I misread it.
You're right, though. The directive talks about the advisory structure and speaks to wanting to ensure that there's like equity of voice in feedback, but the improvement priority and the conversations that we've had with them does talk back to exactly what you were, I think, referencing, where they discussed with us a lot, and Dr. Gant, please correct me if I'm wrong, but a lot about decisions being made in committees or the perception of decisions being made because you may have a quorum or close to a quorum, and then you come out and it really should have been board work, but it was handled in a committee structure. So even, it's interesting, it wasn't written in the directive, but we heard that repeatedly verbally of, if you sit in a committee meeting and we happen to go around and say, well, how would, I would vote this way, I would vote, and you've kind of made a determination, and then you come out. So what they cautioned us against was doing board work in a committee setting. So I think that's what yes. And so that probably would be addressed by this next conversation that's about to come up. But it was interesting that it wasn't written in a directive, but it was said repeatedly. Is that right, Dr. Gant?
Yeah, that seems consistent with what's been shared, as well as it's sort of fuzzy, but like recalling our last meeting with them. I think there were, I don't know if you others had like questions, but there were questions that still existed around the committee around those issues.
So they wrote, the board must avoid establishing quorums at committee meetings, for example. So things to make sure you do
So that was
or
in the writing.
don't do. Yeah, that was.
So
And that's also, this was related to our conversation at the end, I think, of January. Although we didn't have our report, we still had sort of recollection of the things that had been discussed in some of in our group meetings. And so I don't know if you recall, at some point we did talk about committees, and then we were like, do we want to reduce the number? Should we get rid of them? And then I think we may have expanded their scope after that.
Any other questions?
So the word that sticks out to me in this whole conversation about committees is quorum. And the problem was, again, if you had a quorum at a committee, then you got a walking quorum. I didn't ever understand this to mean that you don't have committees. But we'll have that conversation when we talk about committees.
Yes, I didn't either. Cognia, from my just brief experience with them, have not said don't have committees. I think we need to decide, and we'll talk about that later, if that is something that makes it a little bit easier to get into inefficiencies and, possible quorums and things like that, although we've reduced the size.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Let's see, we'll move forward to strategic priority 5.
Yes, we have Ms. Hope McGuire here, and she's just going to present. We have had some requests about CARES and ARPA, and just kind of an overview of those funds and how they're being used. And I know we had talked about a dashboard. The state released a dashboard, but I don't think it really gave us what people want to know, because it seems, and Ms. McGuire and I have talked a good bit about this, that people just really, I think it's like, we've gotten a lot of money. What are you all doing with it? How are we allocating these funds, and are they being used in a responsible way? So she's going to hopefully address that today. And if not, you'll ask more questions and we will get answers for you.
So good evening, everyone. I am Hope McGuire, Director of Federal Programs. And even though this is Strategic Priority 5, this just shows the interdependent work between all of our offices. I am presently in Instructional Services, but I support our Chief Financial Officer, Byron Schuneman, when we do look at all of our funding. Wait a minute. There we go. So this will look at improved effectiveness of physical operations and resource allocation. And it goes to the goal that we have in our strategic plan about manage and protect public funds and assets through efficient and effective use of available resources. I'm going to be going into detail a little bit more about how we ensure those financial resources and personnel and how they are allocated equitably to all of our schools. So one of the things that we want to make sure that you guys are aware of that we presently already do is we have meetings interdependently across all divisions between HR, finance, instructional services, where we look at the FTE counts that each school earns based off of their scheduling and their student needs, poverty ranking, which lands very closely to me with Title I, academic, social, emotional, and climate data that is given to us not only by the state, but through the LEA and principal input. And then we also have one that's very close to me, which is School Improvement Grant, where we presently have 4 schools that are state identified. That is Apps Road Elementary. They are a promise school, meaning that they were making growth, and they're in the 5 to 10% of schools trying to bring up their scores in the state. Classic City High School is a comprehensive support and improvement alternative, and that is based on their graduation cohort rates. Core Middle School is a TSI, Targeted Support Improvement School, and that is focused on students with disability subgroup. And then Gaines Elementary presently was identified as a comprehensive school improvement school, and that is based on being in the bottom 5% of schools data-wise in the state of Georgia. So one of the things that helps us with being equitable is something called the RAMP. And I know we always have acronyms, and as a former fourth grade teacher, I made sure to include this information in here for you. So Resource Allocation Methodology Plan, it details how the LEA distributes non-federal resources. We want to make sure that we are meeting that first, because all the other grants are then supplemental to that work. And we want to make sure that the money that we're receiving, we are giving equitably to those schools when they're non-federal. What is an outlier for CCSD is that one thing that we did not have to do in the past is because all of our Title I schools, all 21 schools are school-wide Title I schools presently, and since I've been here since 2019. We also are LEA that consolidates funds at the school-based level, which is called Fund 150, which is allowing our schools to use their grant allocations and their general operating funds in one big bucket, and it releases the restrictions so our schools can be more innovative and use some of the charter system support of being innovative to support our students. We also are a community eligibility program district, and that means that none of our students and their families have to fill out any free and reduced meal applications, but we still are able to get a poverty ranking by looking at an average of 4 indicators, and that is students and families that are part of SNAP, TANF, migrant, and our homeless student population. From that, we then have a set percentage, and then we use a multiplier of 1.6, and then that gives us what would be a standard deviation of what would be their actual poverty if we were to do applications. So here's your acronym sheet, just to make sure that you can follow me next. So Essa is Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief. And just know that Essa funds can come from many different things. We have been receiving it because of the impact of COVID, but some other states usually would get this around if it was any natural disasters as well. So Essa is just a big overall term that is used by the United States Department of Ed. For CARES, it's the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act. This was a part of the Trump administration. And then American Rescue Plan Act, which we call here in CCSD, ARPA, and that is a part of the Biden administration directive from the U.S. Department of Ed. Under CARES, I just want to emphasize that CARES 1 and SEA Reserve are the only two that have private school equitable services as a part of them. CARES 1 has a portion where it was $501,000 that was spread across schools that have CCSD students. Majority of those are in the boundary of Clarke County, and then we also have one that is not, which is Athens Academy. SEA Reserve was when the U.S. Department of Ed had to go into litigation with other states in the nation around giving those funds from CARES 1 to private schools. So in the state of Georgia, Superintendent Woods decided that we would get that money back, but we still had to give a little bit to those private schools, but not at the same rate. And then CARES 2 is no equitable services. That money comes directly to us. And American Rescue Plan does not have any of that as well. I also want to highlight for you for the American Rescue Plan, this came in recently where we are doing a maintenance of equity, not maintenance of effort, but maintenance of equity to make sure that we are making sure that all of our schools, everything that we do, are focused in on our top high poverty schools, and I will show you that information later. And then here are some transparency resources, as we talked about transparency earlier. And as a former 4th and 5th grade teacher and a mom of adolescents, transparency is very important to me. And so the first thing you'll see is Georgia Insights, and you are able to click click on that. Georgia Insights is actually the Godot's website that is housing everything that is ESSER funding from the state level down to every LEA that is in the state of Georgia. And so you are able to see every LEA's financial standing, all of our plans that we submit, all the work that I do with any of the other departments, and we create documents and send them to Godot. They will be listed on this site. Then on our website, we have the CCSD COVID-19 and ESSER funding tab. And under that tab, you will see us adding more and more information. You will also see in a moment where I actually put some information out, and we got some feedback, and I've read through many different responses, not 791, but it was still 105, just to make sure that I had gone through and really looked at what everybody was asking for us to use our ESSER funding for. And then the last one is, as Dr. Thomas stated, we are working on exploring and expanding out ESSER funding dashboard at CCSD. We presently have one that's for general funds. And so I'm working with Mr. Barlament to just expand that out so where we can add an ESSER tab in there for all the schools, so you still have one site to go to instead of making a brand new site. But you know, perfection takes a little time. So here we have CARES 1 and 2. And so I just wanted to break this down to show you what some of the funding goes to. The yellow side is for district-wide expenses, and the blue is for where we have had funds go for school-based expenses. So when it came to CARES 1 and 2, that's when we were remote. We got the funds. CARES 1 actually ends September 30th of next year, 2022. CARES 2 goes to 2023, September 30th. And so on this side, it just shows you that we use, so much money for diesel that was transporting meals into the neighborhoods, making sure that we could get that out to students while they were remote. Electricity bills, this was to offset the cost that we lost in not in revenue, but austerity. So we made sure that we can move some of that burden off of the general fund, and that was allowable. We used a virtual hiring platform, and that was to make sure that we didn't miss out on good candidates. And we know that we have candidates that are very much so into social media and virtual resources. So we had a hiring platform. PPE amount is listed for you. I know a lot of times I have the question about HVAC. And so we did not refit anybody's HVAC. We just upgraded their HVAC with the different units and supplies. And that cost is there for you. And then we also had hazard pay. So this was making sure that those that were in our custodial services and school nutrition, who were actually having to go above and beyond, and transportation, to make sure that they were safe during that time, they had an extra supplement that was provided to them during that time. One of the main things that I'm very excited about is I worked with Ms. Paula Farmer to make sure that she had a replacement truck to get food in compliant manners to the different sites, because the truck that they had was actually out of date and was about to be out of service. We also used it for emergency meal kits, and those are for chef stable life kits to ensure that when we did those drive-through meals, those kits would definitely have stuff that the kids could have over multiple days and not go bad. And then they also got more cafeteria supplies to make sure during that time, as we're bagging all that things, that didn't impact her budget because it was over the expense that she usually has. And then in the middle, where you see the area of alignment, this just shows you a few of the areas that you are able to actually use funding for. We turned those into project codes in CCSD to help us maintain how we're using our funds. So in the past, we were able to use continuity of staff and service. That is no longer a designation that ESSER funds can be used for. So we then will be flipping all of the things that we had under that to code to other necessary activities that still impacted us from COVID. And then for the school side, I just wanted to highlight that one of the things we did is we've been using that for the retention supplements. And I can say for someone who has 3 people in my office, they were very excited to walk down to Mr. Gaskin's office and sign their name and get their check to make sure that they were thankful for that. And so that was something that you guys definitely saw, and the cabinet decided was a great thing to do. And then we also use funds to make sure that we could get school supplies at the beginning of the school year. And I will go a little bit more into the different categories because I do watch the board meeting, so I know everyone's question is about this at-risk students. Don't worry, I'm coming to it. So I just wanted to bring to you, originally when ARPA came out, we had to create a survey, which I did, and then we had to publicize this survey, which we did on that COVID-19 tab, and get input back from stakeholders. So we only had 105 actual people respond. We did have an overwhelming amount of people who did look at the presentation. It was very quick. It was just a PowerPoint to give them, this is the ideas of the areas that you can use your funds. One thing I would like to highlight is that I did not close it. It is still open for people to go in at any time, because on November the 19th, we had to reevaluate that plan and revise that and send that back to Godot. So they still have time to go back in at any time to do that and put that information in. The other great highlight for this is that even though parents were one of the top, students were the second one who gave input on what they wanted this funding to be used for. And that's really what I was excited about as someone who's been in the classroom, to make sure that student voice was a part of this. So I worked very closely with the high schools and middle schools to make sure that we sent this out, because at that age, a lot of times they have voice that we don't hear. And then we know a lot of times elementary schools, it's the parents that have that voice for the kids and they're working on it. One of the things I do want to highlight is that the things that kept coming out was the mitigation, just to make sure that everybody is safe, whether that be for students, staff, families as they interact in the building. And so we did get PPE with our funds. We have addressed air filtration, alternative spaces. We are looking at outside spaces and how that would look. And then being transparent about what we've done with the HVAC. I'm not one that works in plant services, but I can personally say that I did go to plant services, and they gave me a great tour and showed me all of the items that they're using to actually make sure that we are in compliance. And one of the things for being director of federal programs is I don't mind going to plant services and learning that side of it, because that gets me out of looking at budgets all day. And so then the next thing, when we look at-risk student, I just want us to think about every student within CCSD and what we've been through. So the belief of CCSD is that all of our students have been at risk. And all of our students during this time have had trauma of some kind. And so I think what I want everyone to kind of go back to, kind of celebrate tradition while moving forward. And what I mean by that is, we used to celebrate at-risk students in one way and say, oh, we really got to focus on a kid that's from poverty only. Or we would look at them as just a kid that was not on grade level. Or we would say it was a kid that came from a rough home. I fit in all three of those. So one of the things I wanted to think of, there are other kids who are still at risk. And so when a child, even if they're a gifted student, are not making growth, eventually they're at risk of not being gifted or advanced. They are going back to being on grade level, which could then eventually be below grade level, because each year the standards change. So we have to think of what is impacting an at-risk student. We also have to look at the climate, because we know we're living in a world right now that not only is academics a part of being at risk, but also social, emotional, and mental well-being. So when we looked at risk and we're looking at these categories, eventually, the first time we did not look at breaking out at risk that kind of way. We looked at every kid and then looked at the poverty and the needs of schools, and then that's how we did it. It was not to slight anything about at-risk students. I want to make sure everyone understands that. As a director who deals with Title I, I would not have ever let any of our students who have those challenges not be served. But it was just the fact that we wanted to make sure that we were focusing on the other areas. And then we do have some things that now we will be moving into that category. And you will see, because we have not used a lot of our funding yet, which was the biggest chunk in ARPA.
Question.
Oh, sorry.
So when we look at the theme for socio-emotional learning and trauma and mental health support, what does that look like? Like, what are we spending money on for those things? Is it?
So this is the things that came out of the actual survey.
Okay.
We have not got, that's the next thing that we're going to get to. Yes. So then this is what we have with ARPA, which was the last funding part that came out. And so we have to think about this in kind of two waves. When we had the allocation presented to us, it was only $48 million, but we did not get the entire $48 million. What had to happen was Godot had to meet with all LEAs. We had to create our plans, and they only released from U.S. Department of Ed 2/3 to the state. So the state only gave 2/3 to LEAs. After the program plans were approved, then we got the last 1/3 literally on my birthday, August 26th. So that has not been something that we jumped in and automatically spent, but these are some of the things that we knew were coming down that we were going to use it for. So as I said, the yellow side is for your district expense so far, and the blue is for schools. So for the district side, one of them was we actually have these support positions that are supporting our schools. We have 3 amazing MTSS specialists. I meet with them and give them their guidance on how to maintain documentation for this grant. We also have Mr. Sigmund, who is the virtual learning facilitator, and his support staff. In my office, I was able to have a coordinator of federal programs and program evaluation, Ms. Jamie Washington, and she will be coming to you guys eventually to talk about our next steps of how we're going to allocate funds to make sure that our community can support our strategic plan initiatives. We also use that for positions that were in the community engagement office. EduLog is the transportation subscription that we're using right now to track kids, and so families can find where their kid is on the bus, when they got on, when they get off. And so as you see now, we start having that term of at-risk students, mental and physical health, because we're no longer able to use that continuity of staff and service. So then we readjusted where we could put that to make sure that it aligned. Then for schools, one of the things we did was we had a high need signing bonus for areas that are very hard to fill, which was special education teachers and paras, math and science positions, and we also are looking at psychologists that we need. Each school was afforded 2 additional positions for this school year. The titles that you see up there are what they chose from. They had some schools did teachers, counselors, instructional coach, school-based MTSS coordinator. One school has a PBIS specialist and an academic support specialist. It's usually someone who works with all academic interventionists to make sure that they are maintaining their documentation and pulling the groups as the data sees fit for each grade level in a school. So then that will be aligned to at-risk and mental and physical health, depending on what that position is. We also, this past summer, were able to do summer program at all 21 sites. That was a big strain on transportation, but they worked it out for us. And so that gave also schools opportunities to have a robust program at their school for summer enrichment for the students that they selected. We also gave an allocation based on poverty ranking for this school year for all the schools, and they're now beginning their after school, before school, or Saturday school submissions to get started with tutoring as well. And that is under supplemental learning. And then we also have virtual learning, some funds that have been expended around the distance learning that we've had. And so just
before you go ahead, 2 things. One, she said, but I just want to make sure everyone heard that we are going to be doing those grants to community groups who want to.
It's not grants.
I'm sorry, that not grant. Well,
Can't say the word grant.
Can't say the word grants. What word can I say?
Strategic
Funds.
plan support vendors.
That's
There
why
you
we
go.
pay you. There we go.
Yeah.
So
right
we will
here.
be
We right
working
here.
with community groups who will be submitting to us their proposals for how they can come in and support academic as well as social emotional needs of our students. So that was something we had talked about. We wanted to be able to do that well. Ms. Washington will be working with groups on how to submit those applications as well as how to maintain data to show effectiveness. So at the end of the not grant period, but at the end of the period, they're able to show effectiveness of their work. And so we will be working with them on data collection as well as how to submit applications. So that's part of what Ms. Washington is building in. And then I've had a lot of conversations around mental health for staff, for students. And as you know, we are seeing increased, really disturbing increased violence in our community. We're getting a lot of concerns. Even Dr. Thomas and I were talking earlier about some of our neighborhoods have become so violent that bus drivers aren't wanting to even drive in the areas because of conduct on the buses or things that happen when the bus gets to the community. And we know that a lot of the behaviors we're seeing are a manifestation of this trauma. And people have experienced trauma differently, as Ms. McGuire said, and people respond to trauma differently. And we have to work to support that. So one of the priorities that I will be bringing to Ms. McGuire, Mr. Schooneman, and just the team is what are we doing in the way of mental health support. Dr. Blankenship and I talked today about even maybe getting a mental health professional that's designated to just working with staff and doing programming for staff and,
And
social emotional activities. for
And I can
staff.
say that I actually got to meet with the student support service team on, was it Monday? Monday afternoon? Tuesday afternoon. And presented the same information to them. And they are already beginning that process of what this could look like around supporting students and staff.
Yes.
And then also what it could look like in our communities and
Good.
what is how far we can go, and then where we need Athens Clarke County government to meet us, as they have received CARES and ARPA funds as well. And so that collaboration of braiding those funds could truly do a lot of great work. And so when I met with them, we actually started even a brainstorming session that we hadn't even planned on. It was me really just giving them the information. And so they already are thinking that telemental health was something that was brought up, because we've been doing the telehealth, but they also have telemental health where people can sign up. And there are also some programs where students can sign up for individual times to meet with a mental health counselor and just have a time to talk to someone. We also looked at, I think one person mentioned not only the mental health, but then a support of trauma and how does trauma look. And so Karen Hope is our trauma-informed specialist. She presented to them, and then we're expanding out what could that look like within the schools. So those conversations have been going on just as early as this week.
And I spoke to Mayor Gertz yesterday about that and how can we work with the county, because Dr. Gann and I talked. I mean, we also have to meet our families where they are. And there's a lot of stigma around mental health and a lot of stigma around getting help for mental health. And so being able to provide services in a space, i.e. the community, where our families and our students are comfortable accessing that help, recognizing that many people will not go to a therapist office. So how do we get those services out? So those are things we're looking aggressively at, because until we address these mental health issues, it's hard for kids to learn when they're dealing with a lot of these other challenges. So it has to be a priority.
So yes, so I guess that kind of goes with my question, and this may not even be the appropriate set of funds or monies expended towards this. But when I look at what has been done, I see a lot of hires. But since now we have the WHO, do we have money to spend on like what they can do, like the, I don't know, programs or curriculum or like just different services that they may need funding for to be
Yes.
able to implement? So we will see where that is being done.
Yes,
Okay.
ma'am. So with that 48 million, we have not even touched the surface of that 48 million. I actually will meet with the cabinet on Monday to actually break out and look at how we want to allocate those funds. And then another thing just to touch base on is that within those funds, we also have very strategic people in place, and they're going out to all the schools and then reporting back to us where they see that we might need that support as well.
Yes, can I add something? One of the things that we did with our funds is we are doing a social emotional learning audit. So we have social emotional learning materials. The audit is going to help us streamline how we're using those, what is the impact of the materials that we're using, and where the gaps exist. So we had programming before the pandemic. It was just getting off the ground. We realized that there are some gaps in that, so we don't want to like throw those things away or buy a whole lot of new things that may or may not have an impact. So Tessa Barbazan, who was our director of counseling, collaboratively working with Dr. Watley's office, they're going to do that audit and then bring some recommendations for programming and materials that we can use to support our students.
And just to reiterate, ARPA funds are available to us until September 30th of 2024. And then lastly, just some next steps that we have. We had a meeting actually this Tuesday around RAMP for FY23 planning session. So we're already looking at how can we support schools with equitable staffing. We submitted and got approved our maintenance of equity that was completed on October 29th. And so we are presently, CCSD is a physical equity and staff equity base for our 6 highest poverty schools. And then February FY23 budget planning discussions and approval have started already. And then cabinet discussions and actions are based on the strategic support circle sessions. And those are a great opportunity where the schools are presenting to us exactly what their needs are. And then that is brought back and we are looking at that as well. And I don't know if you, can you hit on the maintenance of equity? This one is showing. And so this is a required document that came directly from Godot. And one of the things of ARPA with the present administration that is in the White House, they are seeking this information to make sure, because they have noticed through CARES across the nation that some things were not done equitably. So Georgia is making sure that we do this. And so if you can go down just a little bit. It literally has a formula in it that we take the 21 schools, it divides and tells us, okay, you can do the top 6, and these are our top 6 schools: Alps Road, Howard B. Stroud, Gaines, Cleveland Road, Classic City, and J.J. Harris Elementary School. From there, we had to move and take the top 6 and put on our fiscal equity and our staffing equity sheets, and they had to meet equity, which we did. And it just looks at making sure back to that maintenance of equity of non-federal funds, which we were following along with. So at this time, are there any questions? No. Yes, ma'am.
That last part where you showed the website with the 6 schools.
That was an actual document. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. I think you lost me a little bit on, so you're saying the money that was used countywide, you took, or has been used countywide, you took that money and audited those 6 specific schools to make sure that those specific schools received the same amount of money as the other?
So what they look at is based off of the number of students. So if you go to the bottom tab, it says like fiscal equity. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So if you look at the top, it's looking at 2021 versus 2022. And actually this was completed by Mr. Byron Schuneman, because this is not my wheelhouse. I just turned in the document. But they look at all of the state and local funds that we received for those 2 years against our actual enrollment. It then creates a per pupil amount for each of those years. And then if you go down on the sheet, we had to take those 6 schools and then they run a test to see, are we within that range when we look at how much money was given to the actual schools against their actual population for 2022 and 2021. And we met equity for that.
Okay.
And then if you go to staffing, because I hope you got the update on we looked at the enrollment, not the enrollment against our FTE staff for those same 2 years. It gives us, okay, so here's the range you need to be within. And then if you go down, it shows the same 6 schools, what their enrollment was and then how many FTEs they had, and we met equitable for that as well.
And then just really quickly, and I'm not trying to cause any sort of controversial questioning here, but in the 22 fiscal equity worksheet, is that correct that Classic City High School was $25,000 per capita per FTE, and then Alps Road Elementary was Gaines Elementary was 10,000 per FTE? Is that,
Okay.
am I reading this right?
Yes. Yes, ma'am. That's the difference.
So, yeah, and I'm looking at.
That's a huge difference.
Yes, and so that is part of the conversation we had, which I would dare not go deep into today, but when we were talking in the past about Classic City being a school versus a program, and you look at the number of students that are enrolled, that's one of the consequences of that.
Could you speak in the mic, Dr.
Yeah.
Blankenship?
Come on up.
So once you have something designated as a school, there's a certain core operational expense that goes along with that. So and staffing that you have to have. So when you consider, you have to have someone to lead the school, you have to have a certain number of teachers, you have all the receptionists, the secretary, all of that. That doesn't change whether you have 50 students or you have 250 students. So that's one of the things that I would imagine makes Classic City have a much higher per pupil expenditure when you see that they only had 34 students enrolled for FY22.
Same thing. I mean, we discussed this in cabinet, and not only the per pupil allocation, because Classic City is a school compared to a program, but also, not being controversial, the elementary school that's after J.J. Harris on this list is Fowler, but it is not in the top 6 because Classic City as a school outranks it.
Okay.
If you go to the first tab, where it says high poverty schools. Oh, I'm sorry. If you go to that tab, and then you can go all the way down, and it'll show how the rank is for all the rest of the schools.
I'm just 25. I mean, that's.
Can you keep going down? There you go, so they can see all of them. Any other questions? I know she's processing. Yes, ma'am.
There's a lot of discussion around that.
Okay,
So,
I missed all that.
Is it Dr. Gann or Ms. Tate?
But I think seeing it this way too, I think helps give some clarity around when you really look at it in perspective or in comparison to those other programs. And also here, and this is not a condemnation at all of Classic City, but hearing what Ms. McGuire said, even, like about Fowler and how close, and looking at how many students are served there versus. And so I do think this is important information and data. Just that wasn't the purpose of you presenting it, but it does help contextualize some of the decisions that we have to make sometimes.
Yes, I was just gonna say, I am appreciative of the ongoing conversations about mental health. I do think that's critical. I actually think it's probably more critical than academics, because I don't think people can thrive. It's hard to thrive if people aren't well.
And it's hard for kids to thrive when they go from innocence to adulthood while they're still the kids.
Yeah,
Totally.
and so I'm glad to hear that that's happening, because for years, I felt like there's been so focus on academics, and I know that's a significant part of our strategy and strategic plan, but it's very easy to lose, like, how do we create conditions? And I know mental health doesn't solve everything, but I am glad that those conversations are happening around the conditions and the supports that we have around students. I did have a question about the timeline. You mentioned that Ms. Washington at some point would come and talk about the opportunities for community organizations to apply. What's the timeline
So
for that?
we have it actually broken up since the grant goes to 2024.
Mhm.
So she's actually going to be looking at doing one and advertising our training sessions. One of the things I talked to her about is it's one thing to provide this information, but it's a different thing to provide the information and then work with actual organizations in how to complete something and how to monitor and do the data. So as I said, I'm a 4th and 5th grade teacher, so and she's a kindergarten teacher. So what we've built out is to actually train how to complete the application, how to gather data, how to make sure to monitor your stuff. So it's always compliant. So if things come up, you are able to say that you have that information. One of the things that we talked about is that we know that there are some organizations that hire grant writers and they always win because of that, but maybe the work that they do does not benefit our students effectively. But then we have other organizations that don't know how to do the grant writing, but can turn the whole world around for a child. So we want to build the capacity of our community to make sure that they truly are getting what they need.
Yep.
It was supposed to be this week, but we were waiting on approval. So it'll be December, I believe, that she moved the date to. But we have them broken out into different sectors to make sure that everyone has an ample time. And then if you don't get accepted the first time to be one of the vendors, we're also giving you feedback and then additional opportunities to try again.
Okay, I'm so glad to hear that. My final question, and this may be for both of you all.
Can I just add something before
Yes.
that? In the board update on Friday, Ms. Washington has made a video that actually walks the board through the steps of the training that the community members will receive. She wanted to make, I mean, it's a great training that her and Hope, I mean, she made a whole video of this is how you apply, this is the rubric, this is how you submit your questions. She's going to do that in person and virtually, but she wanted to provide you all with the video so you can see what our community members will receive.
That's awesome. My last question is the $48 million. You mentioned that it hasn't been really, we've only sort of scratched the surface with that, and that the cabinet would be meeting. I know we have the survey, and I hear you mentioning that we should encourage other people to complete the survey so we can get some feedback. I guess I'm wondering, to what degree are we reaching out to the advisory groups that we already have and stakeholders? For instance, people that may not complete the survey, people that may not either feel comfortable or they just perhaps have not completed it. How do we sort of, I know ultimately the decision rests with the superintendent and the cabinet, but I guess I'm wondering.
So we have multiple areas that we do. So there's also a CARES ARPA email that's listed on that same site, and I actually it's delegated to me. So if anybody emails that site, that's them giving input. We have the survey. Anytime, honestly, you guys have a board meeting or work session, I watch them to pull information from whatever the community is saying. They allow us to use that information. And my supervisor can tell you, I watch them every time. I think I've only missed one when I was away for my birthday. And so then that is information that we can take as well. And then anytime a member goes to one of those advisory boards, they bring that information back and will call me down to say, hey, this is something that came up. Someone asked, can CARES or ARPA be used for this? And then I can provide them with guidance, and they can take that back to those different organizations.
Okay, and I'm sorry, I do have one more question based on what you said and presented. Our students that are served through special education. I know that I appreciate this breakdown. I'm curious, like, how have we used some of the money to better support or to improve or build support, especially given that, like, during the pandemic, we did have some students that, that left. Not all of those were, I understand, served through special education. But I guess I'm just thinking with, I've read, information on how places and just guidance regarding how do we like build capacity to serve our students. How have we included that voice?
So for special education and just for CARES and ARPA, what I presented to you today is the general district's CARES and ARPA. There's also one that was given to special ed. There was one that was given to CTAE. There's also one that's just been released for homeless and unaccompanied youth as well from ARPA. So there are still other sectors of CARES and ARPA. I just have the big umbrella ones. There also, within ARPA, we also supported during summer learning some of the costs for any of the staff that was needed to support students with special needs at the different schools. And I saw you step up.
Yes. You were doing such a great job. That's all in line with what Ms. McGuire said. In the summer and in the school year, we have paid teachers to go to homes to provide support for students, special education students. Next month, we will be bringing an instructional request from the board to approve for our special ed students. That's an intervention for reading and literacy. And we've provided a lot of training for our special education teachers around supporting students as they return back in person. And then we've added more paraprofessionals, one-on-one paras to support our students as needed with the funds that our special ed education director has received.
Okay. I have follow-up questions, but I can send them to you. Dr. Thomas, I'm sorry, about special education and ARPA.
Ms. Davis, I think you
Oh, and mine might need to be one that I write out. My question was about, back to the slide, you don't need to go back there, but there was $832,000 listed for Classic City High School. Is Foothill still using that space? And is that $832,000 only for instruction, or did that include physical space as well?
Foothill still uses
And
the
they
space.
pay us a rental.
And they pay a rental.
Yes,
So
ma'am.
does that reduce that $832,000, or does it not have any impact on it whatsoever? Because we were talking about
You mean
overhead
this,
and
this
expenses.
one right here, the 8? That is their state and local funds that they earn for their building.
So that's just an earning. It's not really a cost.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
I was very confused about that. All right.
I
thank you.
already know. Come on with it.
Okay, so on the community groups, and this is just a general question. I could put in an email, but you're standing right there.
It's okay.
So if there are student groups that are active in our schools that want to apply for funding to support some of the work that they are currently doing, is there additional support from your office or anyone else for those students to reach out to?
Yes. So myself or Jamie Washington, if anybody still is not as confident about what they're doing, we will be doing technical assistance to help everybody. We believe in building everybody's capacity no matter where they're at.
Okay, but student groups.
Because
They
the
would need
money,
an adult sponsor, so
they'll have an adult
have to have
sponsor.
an adult sponsor.
And we have to be very clear, no fund goes directly into someone's hands like that. They
Right.
have to go through a process of being a vendor. We have to go through, so they'll be getting paid out. And then you guys will still see that as part of the financial reports as well.
Okay. And then my other question is, so with this funding, not just the one pot, so not like kind of like the LSGT, but if students have ideas or projects that they want to see happen, is there a space for them to access some of the funding to see some of the changes that they would like to see in our school district? Because I think a lot of times we rely heavily on the thoughts and opinions of adults.
So that goes back to the survey responses where 29% of them were students.
Okay.
And I actually read through all those comments and I could literally tell when it was a student voice. And I think that's just from being in education for over 20 years. But definitely they have been given that voice. And I've always reached out to the family engagement and the principal specialists and the principals at the high schools and middle schools to say, send this out or get input from them. So they are able to have their voice. And a lot of the voices, right, the main thing that came up from one of those things was the social emotional side. And one comment that really stood out was from a parent, but I think the parent doesn't realize the child must have did it as well, was talking about the grieving of a relationship. Their parents got divorced during the pandemic. And so how that impacts everything within their world and now at school. So those are some of the voices that have been out there. But we also have no problem going out to schools. At this time, my office tried to be away from schools so because they had enough people and we didn't want to be an extra person throwing off anything, but we will probably end up doing student groups as well. And I did meet with some students from Classic City to get their input because I know that's, even though it's a small group of kids, they don't usually have their voice heard at all. And we did a virtual training and they actually gave some very good feedback about wanting mentors, wanting someone to talk to them about other careers that you don't necessarily maybe have to go to a 4-year university for. And now also having just someone after they graduate that they might be able to connect back with as that mentorship.
Thank you. I
And
like to
maybe a
see
good-
all of the children's voices, like them see it before they graduate.
And we
Thank
can
you.
also utilize that student advisory group to solicit feedback from their peers as well. I just made a note about that too.
Miss Dr. Anderson, did you have a question? saw
I
your mic
did,
on.
but I'm going to take it offline and I'll just email. I'll
You
just
want me to
email
hit me?
you
Okay.
with more questions.
Anybody else?
I owe you lunch.
I appreciate it. Is it?
Thank you so much. It's awesome.
Our last one this evening is Dr. Blankenship, and she's presenting on her strategic priority 4, human capital and development.
Thank you. Good evening, board. I'm happy to come and talk to you to give you an update tonight on one of our objectives with our strategic goal 4, which is recruit, develop, and retain effective teachers, leaders, and staff who meet the diverse needs of our students. So just a reminder, there are 3 objectives under that goal, and we're going to talk tonight about the 3rd one, increase the retention rate of effective teachers, leaders, and support staff. Underneath that, we have an initiative, or we have several initiatives, and one of those initiatives is to analyze and address the compensation structures so that we can ensure and provide consistent, competitive salaries for all of our employees. So this is really timely because we have been having a lot of conversations and questions around ensuring that we have that we make sure that our staff feels supported and that they want to stay in Clarke County. So just to tell you a little bit about where we are now, we've begun the first phase of this compensation project. We have every year we participate in the Metro RESA statewide annual salary study, and they give us information for salaries in job categories that are typically found in school districts from across the state. We get that information both by school district size as well as by RESA region. So that's very helpful in our comparison every year on where our salaries are competitively with other school districts. But as you all know, we also look at, for many job categories, at how we look in the marketplace within our community as well. So we have done that in the past 5 years, and then we use that annual salary study to continue to monitor that. We have entered into our partnership with Gsba, the Urban Schools Human Capital Academy, to assist with this compensation project. We're currently underway in understanding what those salary schedule constructs are, where individuals are on the salary schedules, how they're placed and moved on schedules, and what are the bands and differentials built into those schedules. Also, we're looking at exemplary salary schedules from both in-state districts as well as around the nation, and looking at best practices and compensation design from other districts. So just a little bit more about the Urban Schools Human Capital Academy. As a reminder, not only are they helping us with this compensation project, but we are a member of that academy. And as such, it allows us to have this national network of schools across the nation. We spent 2 days last week in conversation with several school districts. There were probably 26 different school districts from across the nation that were a part of the Fall Academy. We have one more day on November 16th. And the team that we have that's participating in this, in these conversations, are not only from human resources, but it also includes our principal supervisors as well as Ms. Boness. So I've told you a little bit about where we are in beginning this work. We've already had a number of conversations, and we've given our partners at Gsba the information that they need to get started to do some of this legwork. They really are the experts in the compensation arena. And so that allows us to continue to do the work here at the school and provide feedback to them on the information that they're bringing us. And so then we collaborate together as we move forward. The next phase is phase 2, where we're going to begin that work now. But we will get further into developing our compensation philosophy, our business rules, and our plans to move forward. And then phase 3 will take place from around February to about April. And that's where we'll really get into having some products to look at that will then help us make some decisions about how to move forward in implementation. Some of the ways we're going to measure our progress on this initiative are very simple. So we'll have a completion of a professional and actionable compensation project analysis of where we are and where we want to go. And then we'll have an implementation of the recommendations from the analysis. And of course, we'll be coming to the board for feedback on that as we get to decision points along the way. So we do want to begin to get feedback from you all around that compensation philosophy. We need to know what we value as a district in how we compensate people. So we were going to do that work tonight, but because we are running a little short on time, we're going to save that. And Ms. Boness is going to send a question out to you all to get some feedback. We will also be getting feedback from other stakeholder groups as well, but we certainly wanted to start with our board. So with that, if there's any questions, I'll be happy to take them.
I'm not going to prolong this, but it's not a question so much as a compliment. Thank you so much for this work and taking that deep dive into the compensation thing. I got to see some of the reviews and some of the questions that you guys have been addressing in the conference. And it's just really encouraging to see that we're looking at ourselves inwardly in terms of what is it that we're doing and how do we really want to move forward with meeting the needs of the students and the schools and the principals. So I was really tickled to see the principals included in this conversation. And of course, they have a huge role in this. So again, thank you very much. And I will call Mr. Worthy because he had me go to a course or a group with another national study that dealt with HR and the compensation issues and retention especially. So the ideas that I saw are just exciting. So I think we have a lot to look forward to. And again, thank you for that deep dive.
Thank you.
That concludes all of our reports, and I do echo what Ms. Davis said. I'm really excited. I saw some of the recommendations yesterday when I was meeting with Dr. Blankenship, and ways that we can really work to increase the culture and climate for our staff through not just financial compensation, but other things. And even for me, just thinking a lot about retirement for our, not my personal retirement, I'm sorry, let me be clear, about retirement for our classified workers. I've just been amazed when I see how minimal that retirement is, and what that means for people who have worked 30, 35, sometimes 40 years. And I remember someone saying to me they were getting like $200 a month or something. It just, when I was a principal, I was shocked. And so those are things that we really have to look at and consider. So, when you get those questions, we really welcome that feedback from this group, as well as we will get it from other groups on what we can do to start. So it's more, a livable wage is a start, but there's so many other things we have to look at as well in terms of supporting our staff. So, thank you.
Could I ask one question before we move on?
Yes, ma'am.
And it's a quick one. So the February through April phase 3 plan, do these dates fall in line with the development of the budget for discussion, for the timeline that you need for public comment, and then board whatever, and then whatever else before we vote?
All the whatevers.
All the
Yes.
stuff.
All the whatevers.
Yes, it
Okay.
should.
Okay. It just seems really tight.
It is really tight.
Okay.
But we should be able to have some recommendations prior to that time. So, much earlier in that cycle. And then as soon as we have that, then we'll give that to Mr. Schuneman, and he can begin to, run some scenarios with numbers and that sort of thing. So.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll move forward to item 10. This is our financial report.
Mr. Schuneman is at Gsba.
Right, I remember.
Gsba. But I know he presented that. So I think you have that, Ms. Davis? Do you have financials? No, it's okay.
Okay, let me.
No, because it's here. It's in board docs. I just didn't know if you had anything to add. It's in board docs, and that was what he said. I just wanted to make sure there was nothing that you wanted to add from that meeting, but he did share that, and then he will be here next week if we have any questions before we have to vote. I just wanted to give you an opportunity in case there was anything you wanted to add.
No, because of the time, and also
Yes.
because it is always so absolutely clear in terms of his report.
Yes.
So if there's some questions, then I'll be happy to take them back. Yeah.
He
Thank
did
you.
upload that. Thank you.
Okay, moving forward to committee discussions. Let me get the pulse of the board. This is a necessary conversation, but where are you at? Is this something we need to table to next month, to next week, or should we go ahead and have it now? What was that, Dr. Dykeman? Can you speak in your mic?
Sorry, it was just my opinion that I know that it is late, but I think that we have to have a discussion about it. But that's just my opinion.
Okay.
We have
Others, Ms. Davis?
two committee chairs not here, and I would ask that we table this until next month so that we can at least prepare ourselves and have the full voices in here. I don't know. It seems reasonable to me.
Okay. Others? We have option to table. Thoughts about having it tonight? What's the general?
I mean, the discussion tonight isn't to vote on anything. So I feel like the missing members could still provide whatever their input is at subsequent meetings. This is just to initiate the conversation to see how the board feels about this topic. And I feel like we've been talking about this topic for at least 6 months. So perhaps just a surface level discussion today would be helpful.
Okay, thank you. Any others? At this point, we have 2 people that are interested in having a conversation. We move forward with the conversation. Just sort of nod your head and or this way or that way. Okay. All right. Committee discussion. Let me start with giving maybe a 1 or 2 minute some thoughts. I think we all know like why we're here because we, as Dr. Anderson said, this has been something we've talked about actually for more than 6 months. We've sort of talked about it at times and then we've pulled it back and, it sort of lingers. And so I did think that it was important to have it as an official part of our agenda so we can say, we have had a discussion and it's not hard for people to find, right? Like it was a part of our earlier retreats. I do want to just share and then I'll start with just go around and if you can share any preliminary thoughts that you have. In our state, we have, and this was information that was shared very quick with a quick turnaround, but we have 7 9-member boards and 1 10-member board. We do know that the 10-member board does have a committee for a legislative committee, student services, and planning and zoning. A couple of the 9-member boards have legislative committees and superintendent evaluation committees. Others don't have regular standing committees, just ad hoc when needed. And so, again, I'm more than happy to gather even more information, what those districts are and, try to make a table out of those. But I think I've shared with you all what my thoughts are about committees. So I don't want to monopolize the conversation, but I am going to start here. And if we can just go this way, if there are any thoughts you have.
Yeah, I've listened to both sides of the argument, and especially in light of what has happened at recent meetings. I do find their value in being no committees or ad hoc committees. I think there is a source of power in having a chair, having just that gatekeeper at the committee level. If it's not brought up to the board doesn't know about it, and so I would love to see an opportunity for us, if we were to get rid of the committees, to still use those spaces to designate work sessions to address policy, to address property, to address the certain things that we were designating to be discussed in committees. So I'll stop right there.
Thank you, Ms. Hull. Dr. Anderson?
I'm going to piggyback off of what Attorney Hall just said and just add one other. So the professional development, Miss Julie has said many times that we need to start figuring out how to work smarter and not harder. And I am convinced that sitting on this board for the last 10 months, have been to more meetings than I've ever been in any other board or council or thing that I've sat on. And so there's got to be a different way for us to do this. And if we can't try this experiment and then see where it goes before just deciding that committees are the thing that we're going to do, maybe this experiment will show us that we can be more of a unified voice, that we can be more collaborative, and that the divisiveness that happens at these board meetings can be eliminated if we have the space to all communicate together in one time. So that's my call to all of us to consider when we think about yay or nay on this committee structure thing.
Thank you, Dr. Anderson. Dr. Dykeman?
I don't really have anything to add. I agree with both Attorney Hall and Dr. Anderson. And so I guess the one thing I would add is that I think it's still possible without having standing committees to have ad hoc committees for things that come up, like if there were some sort of property, not decision, but if a few people were needed to go look at a property, I don't know. I think that there are opportunities to have ad hoc committees, but I think that we can try to do without standing committees.
Great, thank you. Dr. Maddox?
I agree with them. I believe that we should, I believe that, that ad hoc committees will probably, will be necessary from time to time. But I would like for us to be more cohesive. And I do believe if we, just do a better job of, of calendar planning as we talk about what was, what is our current committees. And then, that we could, I would like to see us try it.
Okay, and I've shared my thoughts. I agree with all of those points that have been made. Ms. Davis?
So I'm going to go back to my civics training. And so it seems to me that sometimes things do require additional research and an opportunity to vet some things before you bring them to this whole board. So I don't know how you can create an ad hoc committee to do that if you don't have a standing committee that's already, kind of focused on just that particular thing. So what I like about a committee structure, like our Senate, like our Congress, is that people develop expertise around certain things. The fact that some people abuse their position to wield power, we control that. We simply do, because we have a policy and we have a law that says no single board member has the authority to commit this board to anything. And so we were following that. Then you aren't building a structure of power in a committee. You really are trying to divide and conquer. I especially think that it's important when we look at the newness of our board, the newness of our administration as well. So if you aren't able to kind of sort some things out, it's a huge job to come onto this board. It's different than any other board. It's different than any other committee that we may have been involved in or engaged in a philanthropic capacity or skill set capacity. It's different. It's very different. And so that's one of the first things that we learn is that it's huge to manage the affairs of a district this size. I think if we were smaller and we didn't have 21 schools and 13,000 students and the community structure that we have with so many external influencers, it might be easy for us to bring an issue here before this board and settle it. I don't see that happening when we don't yet know what it is to be a board member and don't yet know what our responsibilities are. So absent that committee structure, you really don't get a chance to kind of build some, I guess, expertise, if you will, or a stronger knowledge base around a particular subject area. So I am in favor of the divide and conquer method, but it's my training and it's how I was raised and it's how I worked in corporate for 38 years. You just didn't have a situation where something that big and something that important was left up to a body to just have a conversation about it. You really do need to develop the expertise within your group. And if we're absent that expertise, then we need to hire that expertise or have a directive around hiring that expertise to advise the board and guide the board. So that would be my concern about trying to have a conversation with 9 people, with 10 people, 10 people with divergent views. How do you manage that? How do you get to the level of detail when you don't have a prescriptive way of bringing information to the board and concerns to the board? And so the committees served as that buffer to try and prepare people for this bigger conversation. I would hope that we would consider, again, the things that are coming to us as we go forward in this brave new world with new ideas and new ways of reimagining education. And we would build a committee structure or some structure that would allow us to do that. Absent that, I mean, even the conversation tonight around the ad hoc committee for the 3 months or so, that felt awkward to me. Very awkward. And so whether we have other committees to address particular areas of need for the district, or we have the executive committee dictating the needs of the district, it's still a committee with the
committees around specific areas of need, then we can start to develop some expertise around that to make us better board members, in my opinion.
Thank you, Ms. Davis. Ms. Gallagher.
I think that if we continue to do things the same way that they've always been done, we'll continue to get the level of dysfunction that this board currently has. I like being in a space where I can ask questions at one meeting and then everyone get the answer, rather than people being in a committee meeting and then asking questions and they know the answers, but then I look like the bad guy because I got 1,000,001 questions. So I'm good if we get rid of committees.
Any additional thoughts from the district? I know it's a board decision, but I also know committees, they do, we lean on the support of district staff.
No, I shared with a couple of team members who are like kind of point people for committees, just the feedback that we received last week from Julie. And, it's a different mindset, a shift in thinking, but the feedback that I did receive was that people could see some of the benefit. We talked a little about even just power differential and, positions that sometimes people are in and don't even, not intentional. And sometimes you're in a position and you don't even realize you're in a position. And I think sometimes you get put in a position and no one attempts to put you in a position. It's just by virtue of being in that space. And so, it will take some shifts in how we do the work, but I think there can be some definite benefit in doing that. We'll just have to make changes if that's the will of the board. And, we will just do things, like we would, like Julie said, well, the conversation should be with me. And then I have the conversation directly with that staff person. So we would still have point people that did the work for those committees. It would just be how that information or task is given to them to be done. So we didn't have, no one shared any opposition to the change.
Okay. Thank you. So it sounds like there is consensus that people are open to moving forward without committees or trying an ad hoc approach. I do know that all of our details are not worked out. And so that will be something that, we can decide if we need to put more things around. But I also think this has policy implications too. Certainly if our committees are going to be dissolved, then, that would be work in policy to go ahead and dissolve them. I guess my question to you, Mr. Pruitt, is if the board, it's a discussion tonight, but next week, if there's action, one, does there need to be action taken? And then if there is action taken, can we just move that forward as an action item?
Yes, I suppose it's going to have to come from staff and the administration to put together the work in the policy manual, like you say. So Mr. Harris is the head of that. So the board could take a vote if you want to, indicate to the superintendent that's the direction you want to go in, and she should have, get with Mr. Harris and bring back those policy manual changes to you to implement it.
Okay. And so I want to be clear, I'm understanding Mr. Pruitt. So we would be voting on a recommendation basically that the district brings with the changes, the policy changes from Mr. Harris.
Exactly.
Okay.
Would we have to vote? So we wouldn't vote next week about whether or not we want to do this before the policy gets changed? Or?
No, that's what I was saying. You could vote to do that, or you could just, allow the superintendent, Mr. Harris, to bring that to you and vote then. But it being a board issue, I think probably, looking at Dr. Thomas to tell me if I'm wrong, but probably the administration would look to the board to tell them, yes, we want you to bring those policy changes to us.
All right. Okay, so I think there is consensus that yes, we do want you to bring those policy changes to us. Now, I guess, Dr. Thomas, in this case, it's a week between now and the next week. Would that be something that we would need to play realistically? Would that need to be something on our December or January? How much time do you think this will take your staff?
Yeah, I'll be glad to work with Mr. Harris on it. I mean, we will just do a word search in the policy manual for committee, and we'll figure out where it appears and what changes need to be made to. I didn't say that. That is what we're saying. He can get it done by next week. We can try.
He says, I can get it done. Mike said, I did not say that. Mr. Harris, stop speaking for the both of you. And I would say let's do the December, because I think that allows, we don't need to rush it. We need to do it right and do it well.
Okay.
And so Mr. Harris likes to please, but he said we started the search in preparation. So he was already looking to anticipate this. So
Okay.
he's a step ahead of you, Attorney Pruitt. But I still say let's try for December, because that at least gives a little leeway.
Okay. Any additional thoughts before we move forward to our redistricting discussion? Ms. Davis, and did you say you, Dr. Maddox? Oh, okay.
So I'm willing to change. Well, I'm not going to change my comments because that's what I believe. But it's obvious that you have the votes to go forward with this, and nothing's going to happen next month in a meeting. So do we suspend meetings, period, until this policy change is made? Who would do anything when we know that it's going to end in 30 days?
I don't think we do, because right now we still have the policies that are standing. I know that there's still some work you all are finishing up. I would imagine there's some work for that policy committee that they would need to finish up. So I wouldn't think that we would need to suspend those. In January is typically, I think, when we would decide on policies anyway. And so, so either way, that was, we were going to be having discussions about policy. So I think continuing with policy, the committees that exist, and then we take action in December based on that recommendation. Okay. Thank you all. Moving forward to our redistricting discussion. I know Mr. Pruitt sent us out some information a few weeks ago. And I don't know how much you've had a chance to look at it, but it's basically a draft of, of our lines. And he also shared with us that ideally this work, the board would have taken action or just made decisions based on this or any changes we would like to see really before by January. And then Mr. Pruitt, I'm going to ask if you would share, I know you share it too, like if there were, so first I want to open the floor for any questions that you have based on what he shared. And then, and this will also be on next week's agenda, just as, continued discussion. I know we need to take action, but if we feel like we're at a place to make a decision, but I know it may feel like a lot of information, but Mr. Pruitt has shared a timeline. There are also some other resources that may be available. Like you mentioned that if one or two board members wanted to go and, meet with representatives. So I'm going to turn the floor over to you, Mr. Pruitt.
Yeah, glad to. Thank you. So, so you have the first draft. It's the minimal changes to just keep the populations as equal as possible in each district. If there's any concerns from any board members or from the board as a whole about how any of those lines have changed, we can get those back to the reapportionment office and they can redraw it. If there aren't, you can just go ahead and vote next week that you're fine with this. And then we'll get a member of our local delegation, Representative Fry is the one who's been helping us so far to draw the bill. I do understand that General Assembly members want these bills written and ready for them to drop the first day the General Assembly meets in January, so they can get them passed and implemented as quickly as possible. But yes, if there are a lot of concerns and more maybe than you can just do with that kind of back and forth, yes, I mean, you wouldn't want to have a quorum of the board go to the Capitol, but you might want one or two people to go to the Capitol, and they'll have somebody from the reapportionment office sit there with the computer and the PowerPoint, and they can move the lines while you watch them do it and see the different configurations.
Thank you. Any like thoughts so far of what you've seen, or any specific questions or concerns that you've seen?
I have two very general questions. Is the reason that the school district lines are different than the county district lines, is it because of school population?
Different number of board members.
Okay. So if we move to the district's lines, it would reduce the board member
No, they
population.
have, mayor and commission has more members than
They
you
have
do.
more?
More?
They do?
10 of them.
They have 10?
Mhm.
I knew that. I need to stop.
But if we had the same number, which a lot of counties do, we would try to make them the same.
Go to 10. Yeah, go to 10.
My question was actually the opposite. Do you know the reason why we have 9?
Oh, that's changed numerous times. You can go through the charter back to 1955 and see exactly the years it went up and down. Actually, at the beginning in 1955, of course, it was before unification in 91. Board members were all appointed. The city had a certain number of appointments and the county had a certain number of appointments. So it's changed multiple times since then. Now there's actually a general statute that says that if any new boards are created or if they're reconstituted, they won't make a board that has more than 7 members.
Yeah, but that doesn't apply.
That doesn't apply unless you wanted to change. If you said you wanted to go to 8 members, they'd say, no, you can't have more than 7. Or less, but you can't have more than 7 if you change.
And we can't, I'm not suggesting this, but I'm just asking. We can't go up either and align exactly with the commission districts.
Correct.
Okay.
Isn't the 10th commissioner at large? Or did they actually carve out a district for that 10th commissioner?
I'm pretty sure they all have districts.
I don't know the
I think
answer to
they
that
do.
off the top of my head.
Okay. I want to say it's at large.
Do your microphone, Dr. Anderson.
Sorry, that 10th seat was assigned its own district. There's no longer that super district
super guy.
represent.
Okay.
Yeah, there's no longer that.
Okay.
So I did know that. Okay. Just not lose any civics points there.
All right. Any additional questions, concerns? Are you all feeling that we're okay with this to take action on next week? Are you feeling we need to go to the Capitol? Or are you thinking we need to ask for some specific changes? As a board, what are we thinking?
You know, I took civics a long time ago, so I know that's highly political. I'm not touching it.
I mean, I'll say, I mean, if we're having 9, I don't have any particular issues with the way that this is drawn. I think based on the trainings and the discussions we've had over the past 2 years, a lot of what has been brought up, and Dr. Gant even mentioned, there are something like 140 something districts in the state, and there are maybe, how many did you say had 9 members? One has 10.
Yeah, I don't know if I had the number for 9. Let's see. Yeah, I did. Yeah, that's right, Ms. Gallagher, 7.
And so only 7 districts in the state have 9 and one has 10. So there are 8 out of 140 districts that have 9 or more members. And we're the smallest county in the state. I just feel like having 9 members on the school board is a little unwieldy.
My only hesitation at considering taking it down in number is I believe somebody, it might have been Miss Julie, said that no, it wasn't. Someone said that the reason why we have 9 is because of equitable representation on the board, and that historically there had been issues of having multiple types of voices because of the way that the lines were drawn. So if we do entertain reducing the number, we will also need to really seriously consider the issue of having an equitable board. And that goes to Ms. Davis's comment. That is a very, very political question and issue.
So my only question I would say is, again, I looked at the maps and saw that everybody got to keep their seat, so they didn't draw anybody out of a seat on the school board. But the question should be, what is the makeup of our districts? And so if we're talking about having equitable representation on the districts, what's changed? I know that we had, 3 or 4 census tracts that held the majority of the minority population. That does not necessarily correspond to these districts. But if you look at like District 3, that little, I call it my little puppy dog shape because that's the shape of my district. And it literally was carved out to give minority representation. I know that the former attorney for the board said that they carved out District 9 to give minority representation to the board. And I don't know where the others came from. So
there's another page in that. I think there were 4 attachments, and one of those emails gives the demographics of the population for each district.
I need to go back and look at that because I didn't see that when I looked before. Okay. Okay. Yeah, because the gentrification has changed a lot of the demographics. And so the question is, I'm sorry. Yeah. So, right. So the question becomes, when we're talking about it being unwieldy, why do we think that it's unwieldy?
Why do we think it's unwieldy to have 9 members on the school board? I mean, I think we've been talking about it over and over again in terms of, for me, in terms of like people being able to meet at the same time, having discussion, having everybody's voice being heard, but also being efficient in terms of meetings. I just think 9 members and 10 with the superintendent is just a large number of people to have on a board to make decisions when it's not our
areas of expertise,
permanent job. So it's not like we spend 8 hours a day with each other. We meet. I mean, we meet a lot, but we don't meet the same as a full-time job. And so we've talked about it. We have trouble getting to know each other, understanding each other, being able to trust each other. I think that, that's not just because there are 9 of us, but I think having 9 people makes it more difficult than having a smaller number.
And again, I agree with that. I agree it's definitely difficult to have a conversation with 9 people for sure. But then you said it, this isn't our full-time job. And so in a governance role, we literally are depending on the superintendent and staff to run the district. And we actually don't have to be here 15 hours a day. We don't have to be here as often as we do. But again, we'd also have to have a structure in place that would give those decision makers and in that governance role the information that they need in order to do that. And so there's some other things that would have to come into play before we get to a place where we're reducing it. And again, where do we get our information from to make those decisions is a bigger question. So.
All right. Other thoughts? What are y'all?
Who created 9? Was it by the community, or because the board couldn't create a 9th district, right? Or the 9?
Right. It's always the General Assembly.
It's always the General Assembly that does that. So we can talk about going smaller, but we would have to get Representative Fry or someone to go and take it to the General Assembly.
Right. What Dr. Gant was talking, I guess she was raising the question, do you want to ask Representative Fry to do that along with this redistricting? But you don't have to wait until another decennial census to make that request to reduce the size of the board if you want to do that at some point. So It's not now or wait 10 years.
Okay.
Would that come from the board or would that come from the community? How would that even become a subject?
I mean, the General Assembly is not constrained by any, any step that has to
Right.
be approved first. For that matter, they don't technically have to have the board's vote to implement this map, but they would like to have that, obviously. So if the board size, if there were a proposal to reduce the size of the board, it'd be up to our local delegation to decide how much input, how much unanimity they're going to require before they introduce that bill.
So that could come from inside the board or it could come from outside.
It could.
Awful. Thank you. Awesome. That's what I needed to know. Thank you. I don't want to belabor that conversation, but I needed that question answered. Thank you.
Okay, so am I sensing that we want to keep these where they are right now and take action next week? But also there is the conversation out there, and I think Mr. Pruitt has clarified this, that if the board decides that it wants to explore that area or make a decision to decrease our size, that it doesn't have to happen right now. And of course, if that's something that a board member decides in the future that, or within this next 12 months that we want to, go back and revisit, I think, that's fine. All right. So Mr. Pruitt, it sounds like I think there's consensus that we'll take action on the draft here next week. All right. Okay, moving forward to our policies to be posted for 4 weeks for public comment. Were there any questions with these? I know Mr. Harris.
Right, and Dr. Yeager did share with all of us a report on all of those. VCBH, she gave the report about executive session and that we needed to have that one due to cybersecurity to be able to go into executive session. And then ABCDA was regarding unexpired fulfillment of terms. And it seems like that policy was reviewed in 2016, so it was time to review it. But it seemed that there were no revisions required. However, in that policy meeting, we did discuss that we need to determine what our procedure will be. And I think Attorney Hull was going to look into that so we don't have to change the policy, but then what do we do once we get those applications if there's a vacated seat?
And by looking to that was just asking what some other boards were doing, not making any type of direction or anything like that.
Right.
No, I think that's great to hear. And if there is a draft, I know we may be winding down the policy committee as it exists right now, but I do think that's something that's directly related to the board. And we never know when we're going to have to use it. So I do think if a draft can come, so we'll know if we have to, we'll have it in place and we would have taken action on that. And we won't find ourselves in sort of these spaces where not quite sure how to handle the process when someone is going to be replaced. So if you could, if you all could work and get us a draft, I think that would be great.
Shall I submit that to I shouldn't submit that to the whole board. That goes to policy. The board is telling me that is something that they would like to see submitted at a policy committee.
Yeah, let me back up a little and let me ask the board because that was just me.
Okay. I'm just trying to do.
Yeah,
right.
What are you all's thoughts? Is dealing with when we have to replace a board member for whatever reasons.
I think it would be great to work on it at a time when we don't need it emergently. So I think it's great to work on it now. Whether you start a draft of it and then bring it to the policy committee or start a draft of it and circulate it to the full board, it doesn't matter to me.
Okay. Ms. Davis?
So I'm thinking that if we're not going to have a policy committee, Gsba has offered to do maintenance on the policies and maintain our policies. So I would want us to maybe consider outsourcing it, sending it all back to Gsba, and then let them bring us whatever they have that the other boards in the community or in the state are using. So it may already exist someplace. But if we're not going to have a committee, I don't see why we would continue discussing it. We should probably look at what is the most efficient way to handle policy. We're not going to have a committee.
Thank you. Others? Okay. So I think there are two people who have said that it could be helpful because the policy committee still stands right now. And Ms. Hull needs some direction. I'm okay if the policy committee doesn't come up with a draft, but we do need something to replace board members. So, Ms. Hull, if you can clarify, I don't think it's the policy. I think we
Right.
need a reg or something more specific.
And so the ask was to see what other boards that were kind of in our same range of size and demographics, what their regulation is to enforce it, to see if that's something that Dr. Thomas would like to review and put in place for a regulation. But the policy itself is fine. It's just the how.
And if I could add, and you may already know this, but that policy is word for word, just straight from your enabling legislation that's comes from the General Assembly. So you can't change that anyway. But I think the question that's come up is strictly around filling vacancies. And, how are you going to solicit applications, and how are you going to advertise it, and what's the timeline, and how do you evaluate them, and all of that.
Okay. Well, if there are no other objections, thoughts. Okay.
Sounds like a good way to get that board reduction in.
All right. So you'll share with us, or someone will share with the board what you find in a draft, or okay.
Am I supposed to have that by next week? I need a deadline, or I'm not going.
I don't know. What do y'all? I don't know that that's feasible, but you can speak to that.
Well, it's
Okay.
not on the agenda. All that's on the agenda is just to review the policy without changes. The reg would have to, that would have to go through whatever process we come up with.
Oh yeah, because we don't
that would
even
be
vote on
We
regs.
don't write regs.
We don't vote on regs. So okay, all right.
That's
So
going to be
I'm here
Dr.
in
Thomas
January.
bringing that to us, right?
Okay.
Yes, so
Okay.
we'll work together once you let us know what's there, and then we can work to, right. And even though it's a reg and it'll come from us, in this case, my feeling is that, this is really the board's work in choosing a board replacement. And so I think we have to be flexible and really work together. There are going to be things that really are about your work. And I don't want us to dictate that, but yet being respectful of the policy and regulation process. But we will, really hear how the board wants to manage replacements when that's necessary.
Okay. Dr. Dykeman.
I just had a thought. Could it actually be a norm instead of a policy regulation? And then
I'm watching Mr. Pruitt. I'm just doing this.
And then it really
I didn't want
would
to jump
be.
in. Yeah, there's no reason it couldn't be. That's right.
Because then it really would be the board's thing. Well, you have to help us write the norm.
Yeah, still a draft norm.
Now you actually have some work to write the norm.
Ms. Davis.
That was all. It sounds like the assignment has been made. I'm happy.
All right. Okay. Thank you. So moving forward to, where are we? The policies to be adopted.
BJE, there's one policy that came before the board this month. No public comment was received. That was a revision to lower the level of expenditure from 80,000 to 50,000. And there's been no comment on that.
Okay. Any further questions or concerns about that? We'll be taking action on that next week.
I still don't know why. I don't know what triggered that policy change, so that's a, still don't have an answer on that. And maybe I won't get one, I'm good.
I think it maybe the policy committee or somebody who attended it could it could share. I'm generally I have the same questions as far as like.
This was one that kind of aligned to the discussions we've had before. It was presented as a desire from the board to want a little more oversight. And so this was a good example of one that, right? Thank you. And so it was an example of us saying, if that's what the board wants, we're not doing anything that we shouldn't do. We don't have anything to hide. It is more for the board to have to approve. And you all do already get all of those reports every month, but that was where it came from. So this was an example of one that was quote unquote brought by us, but it was as a result of response to a request. Yes.
Thank you.
Oh, can you speak in your mic, Dr.
I believe this discussion even started before Dr. Thomas, and it's just an example of different leadership. And I'm gonna leave it right there.
Good memory. Thank you.
That is correct. Historically, from what I understand, that's how it came through. I think from what I was told in the policy committee meeting, there was some concerns about how much was being spent on consulting fees, and if there were a reduction was based on that.
And when was the last time? Am I like not remembering this correctly? We did do we talked about this, or maybe it was just in did it ever come before the board to make the changes, or it
No,
didn't?
We
just
have talked about it a number
Okay.
of times, and we even had Mr. Schuneman. We had him do like a spreadsheet that showed us the different, because at one point before we got on the board, it was 10,000, and then it went to 80,000, and so people were just sort of asking like, what are the expenses that fall between 10 and 80,000? And so he showed us what those were, and we have that available to us. And I don't know the exact reason why we landed on 50,000, but there have been some like ongoing discussions about it.
Yeah, I think if I recall, that seemed to be a lot of where they stopped, maybe in between that 30,000, 50,000 range when we looked at what was being purchased, and what would allow her to be able to make or the superintendent to be able to make emergency decisions without having to come for board approval should they need to. So we had a discussion around that $50,000 being that number.
I believe that was a board conversation, if I remember right. So that was a board, and it's true. Mr. Shimmerin, he came back, he made changes, he made recommendations, but again, let's say and she better not leave. But let's say Dr. Thomas decided to leave. Yeah, things are great now, but then so you have to think long term with the money, and so it's not about one specific person. It's about a process. Period.
Okay. All right. So any additional comments around that? Questions? All right. We'll move forward to our personnel recommendations, the November board report.
So it will be my recommendation next week that the board will approve the November board report plus addendums. We do know we have one or two addendums that will come we're waiting on security clearance from that department. And so those will be there next week.
Okay. Any questions about that? All right. We'll move forward with our consent agenda. If you could just let us know if you want to pull something off of consent. We only have 15-1. These are our board work session minutes.
Consent.
Okay. Approve the board meeting minutes from October 14th.
Consent.
All right. Approve field trips.
Consent.
Okay. And then the request to submit an RFP for 21st Century Grant for high school students.
Consent.
Did I hear something else
You
other
said
than
consent.
consent?
We just said consent.
Okay. Okay.
We just said
All right. We'll move forward to number 16, which is adjournment.
so move. Second.
All right. Ms. Gallagher made a motion. Ms. Hall made the second. Seeing that there are no objections, we are adjourned at 9:49 p.m.